have been to this whole year, really since Secretary Raffensperger took office, have been to try to increase confidence in election results. I think we really saw it in the United States after 2016, when people started questioning confidence of election results. In Georgia, we saw it, of course, in 2018, and we're seeing it again now. So we are trying to put in place stuff that is going to, to increase confidence. That's why we did the full hand audit. The Secretary chose the presidential race for that reason. It was a ton of work by election officials, but they did it. They did it really well. And I think that process has been helpful to really show that these allegations about machine issues or software flipping or re-scanning votes twice or things like that we've heard, that hand audit basically puts all those to rest. And so I appreciate our election officials for doing that. And we hope and we believe a signature review will show the same thing. We're happy to be able to do that as well. I do want to provide some updates on some investigations, like the chairman said. One of the main things we've been getting asked about, and this is in current litigation, is the Trump campaign has thrown out a bunch of numbers of illegal votes. First of all, there are always illegal votes in elections. There is no such thing as a perfect election. By an illegal vote, I mean someone who is not an eligible voter who is allowed to cast a ballot. The law, our laws, and every federal law, every state's law basically, errs on the side of allowing an ineligible person to vote rather than not allowing someone to vote at all if they might be eligible. So the Trump campaign has thrown out numbers that 2,056 felons voted illegally. That's not true. We have we are investigating a total of 74 potential felons who cast a ballot. And what our investigators do is we have to talk to each one of them and actually investigate to see, okay, was that person still under felony sentence? Sometimes they're not. So we're investigating those. The total universe, though, is 74. They've also alleged that 66,000 underage people voted. Investigated that. The total number of underage people who voted is 0. We're able to look at everyone who voted and look at their birth date in the voter registration system. And I think there was 4 people who requested a ballot before they turned 18, and they all turned 18 prior to November 3rd, which means they're allowed to vote. Trump campaign has said 23 people voted that weren't registered to vote. Again, the number on that is 0, because we can see everyone who voted in our voter registration system. We're also investigating the allegation that 300, well, let me say this one first. 10,000 people voted who died before the election. Again, that's not true. We're investigating some reports of dead voters. I think a couple of them that were submitted in litigation. Turns out they were not true. One of the ladies, she'd been registered, I think, since like 1950 something, and in the registration system, she was listed as Mrs. whatever her husband's name is. I don't think we see that much anymore, but there was something that we saw then, and we have talked to her. She was, and talked to her daughter. She's not dead. Her birth date matches, her gender matches, her voting history matches. So, that was not. And I think we have found a couple instances of dead people voting. Generally, what that goes to is if someone has died recently and a family member votes for them, and that handful of instances is consistent with what we see in every election. Again, it's not okay, and those people will go to the state election board, and we will seek punishment for them to the fullest extent of the law. But it's nothing that we are seeing that would put in doubt the result of the election, even in a very close election like we've had right now. We're investigating 395 people who cast ballots in 2 states, which is illegal. This is an investigation that we get basically after every election. Our current elections director, who used to be our chief investigator, said that after the 2008 election, we received an allegation that 30,000 people voted in both Georgia and Florida or Georgia and Ohio. And he investigated every single one of those. It can be tedious because we get information from both states. Then we have to kind of push them to get us the information in a timely fashion. At the end of that investigation, there was 3 people who had voted in Georgia and another state. So,
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Could you, I'm sorry, could you repeat that number, the initial number of investigations you have for people who are being investigated for voting in multiple states? I missed it. I'm sorry.
The allegation that we have got for this election was 395 people. From the old one I was talking about, there was an investigation after the 2008 election of 30,000 people.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Now, it's also been alleged that 15,000 people who are no longer Georgia residents voted. Again, what we are seeing is that's not true either. And we have submitted documents in court showing why the numbers the Trump campaign has submitted are not accurate. And it's for a lot of reasons. A lot of them are sometimes just not the same person who matched. So that's part of it. And then, but we're running our own numbers on those too to really help prioritize those investigations and see what might the actual number be. So that's what we're investigating right now. What we are seeing from our initial investigation, it's nowhere close to what the Trump campaign is saying, and it's going to be nowhere close to anything that would put the investigation or the result in question. Those are tedious investigations that requires basically, figuring out the residency of each person, and residency can be complicated. There's people who no longer live in Georgia who are eligible voters. Of course, it's going to include overseas military people. It also includes college students. It also includes people who are maybe somewhere temporarily for a job or caring for a family member. And it also includes people who might have more than one home, basically. So that's what we're looking at, and we'll continue to do that. Now, even a small number of illegal votes from our perspective is not okay. And so we will go after each of those. Unfortunately, and this I think gets to another question, it is a fairly tedious process to really wrap a bow around all of those and get them ready for submission to the state election board and for potential prosecution if that's the direction the state election board chooses to go.
Brian, the question, you kind of went.
Sorry, can y'all hear me a little better now?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman Blackman.
Just a second. I'm gonna make sure, Mr. Germany, are you done?
Final thing I was gonna talk about, I think this addresses some of the questions that we've received from you guys also, is what we are seeing regarding January 5th. basically what we are seeing right now for the voting that's going on. And frankly, what we are seeing is kind of both sides really pushing the envelope on what's allowed. We have many investigations into third-party groups with the increase in absentee voting. I think third-party groups, particularly ones that are aligned with Democrats, are sending a lot of mail to people, including people who no longer live here. Like I said, some of those people are going to be eligible voters. A lot of them are not because of the restrictions that Secretary Raffensperger mentioned that we have on conducting list maintenance under federal law. So we're seeing that. We're seeing a lot of text messages, including text messages saying, "Oh, you can still vote if you don't live here." You can't, unless you're still a Georgia resident. But we're not getting the sense that people are really, the political groups are really being careful about that. And frankly, they should be, because it's important. We're also investigating allegations of people handing things out in return for voting. I had a conversation yesterday. We got a lot of complaints about the trucks that said vote Democrat, get $1,200. After those complaints, the person running those ads decided to end that campaign. That will still be submitted to the state election board to determine whether or not that's a violation of Georgia law. You're not allowed to offer to give anything in return for voting or voting for a particular candidate. You had a disclaimer that said this is not an offer solicitation. So I think we'll see whether or not the state election board thinks that's sufficient to be compliant with Georgia law. But he stopped the campaign regardless. We're also seeing issues with what's been called line warming, where people hand out things to voters in line. On one hand, if you're handing something out, like a bottle of water or something, to everybody, and you're not saying anything about voting, then it's legal. However, what we are seeing based on our investigation is that what really is happening is that third-party groups are using that as kind of an excuse to get around the 150-foot campaign barrier. There's a food truck handing out food. If they're handing out food to everybody without conditioning on voting, it's arguably okay. What we saw when our investigator went there was the person said, "This is for voting." That makes it not okay. So, I think that's something that we really want to crack down on. I think that really the polling place really should be kind of an oasis for voters. When you're there voting or when you're in line to vote, you really shouldn't be bothered by anybody. If you are unable to read or otherwise need assistance, if you're disabled, physically disabled, then you can get that assistance. But there's plenty of people in the polling place who can provide it. So I really think we need to, both sides could really help by trying to leave polling places an oasis for voters, just for the purpose of casting votes. And I think moving forward, what we have seen is I think a real need, talking to county election officials this year. Some of them made the good point that they were being asked this year to basically run 3 parallel voting systems, an absentee ballot system, and an early vote center system, and an election day system. And based on the volume of absentee this year, that was really unsustainable for counties. And I think that's something that the General Assembly should look at going forward in the way that the Secretary talked about. There's a few other investigations I was going to provide updates on. It might be better, Mr. Chairman, if I turn it over to you guys and then y'all can ask about the ones that you want. feel like I've been talking for too long.
Yeah, we'll give you a break there, Mr. Germany. Thank you for those updates. I didn't know we do have Mr. Sterling on, but we have a number of questions lined up. Did you want to take a minute, Mr. Sterling, and tell us in what capacity you work for the Secretary of State's office, and any?
Sure, I can. First, Merry Christmas to everybody. Thanks for coming to do this. I have been a contractor as the voting system implementation manager since November of 19. The intent, we were trying to find a project manager. We were out there, and every time we had somebody lined up, firms who do this, engineering firms, essentially the salespeople all wanted to do it because it was a big dollar thing. It was like, $500,000, $1 million to be the project manager on $100 and some odd $1 million project. But when the attorneys got to it, they basically said reputational risk. No matter how much margin we make on this one lawsuit, and given what happened in 2018, they were all basically saying, we don't want to do that. So we were stuck going into October without an official project manager. I've been managing everything on the procurement side. So internally, a decision was made that I would become the project manager as a contractor, and then we would bring in somebody on a contract to do a portion of my COO duties, which is the role I had previously. And that, in order to open up those dollars, I went from being a state employee to being paid as a project manager through the bond, which is the normal way you would do this in a construction situation or anything else that we do with bond funding. And that thing expires in about, 8 days. And then I will go back to the COO, CFO position, even though we have 5 days left in the election process for the runoff. It's pretty, at that point, everything's baked into the cake. It's just easier on the books to do it that way. And
you don't have any contract work with anybody else at present?
No, I had an LLC. It was the easiest way to set it up. That was why we did it that way.
Okay, well, we'll move on to questions. I appreciate that. Thank you all again for being here. Representative Gravely, did you have a quick procedural question, or?
Mr. Chairman, I do. I want to direct the question toward Mr. Germany. I know many of the committee members were trying to capture the data, the conclusions of the investigations that he was offering. I think it would be good for the committee. I know as I'm talking to my constituents and trying to provide answers and holding accountable the appropriate people, I'd like to see if the Secretary of State's office would provide in a bullet point format underage voters, alleged felon voters, and those things that was just read off to us. If he could provide an answer, kind of a bullet point answer format to us, so that we can have that ready reference and be able to review it. I wasn't able to capture all the information that he was giving us, but I think it's pertinent to the hearing today, and if they could provide that, that would be fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, good point. Is that a problem, Mr. Secretary?
Happy to do that, Mr. Chairman. I would add that the numbers I was saying were kind of, here is for felons example, we're investigating 70, and that's the whole potential if 100% of them are actually under. So at the end of our investigation, it will be less who are actually felons, but I'm happy to provide you sort of the universe that we're seeing.
Thank you.
Try to get these in order. Chairman Powell.
Yes, sir. Good morning.
Good morning.
I had a couple of questions that I want to ask. And first, I want to thank the Secretary Raffensperger for his earlier comments. After the last meeting, I had several questions that really did prompt me. And one was that I had reached out to the AG's office about possibly doing an audit, statewide audit, which I think was proper. And I want to thank the Secretary and his staff for prompting that, because I think within that next week or last week, they came out and said that they were going to do an audit to get a sampling audit, just so we as a committee and as members of the House would have some detailed information go on to see just if and how much the fraud did exist. And I do want to thank him for that. And I'd like to know a little bit about the criteria about how they plan on doing the signature match. But I did want to thank him for some of the other comments he made. As Ms. Wynn pointed out at the last meeting, I think I'm the only member on this committee, might be the only member left in the legislature that voted against expanding the absentee voting without cause a few years ago, because having been involved in elected politics all of my life, I've always known that the number one place to find any fraud would be in the absentee system. But there's a few questions other than that one that I just asked about the criteria for doing this statewide match, which would be to our benefit legislatively. I also wanted to ask a few questions that came up in the last meeting that gave me some pause for concern. One was about private money being given to various local boards of election. That's one question. The second question, how much of that money and how prevalent is that private funds are given to local boards of election? I did note that one thing, a couple of things that concerned me was, you know, we hear people talk about the drop boxes, and that's the security around these drop boxes. I'm told that they were paid for by somebody privately. One of the things at that last meeting that gave me some rise to concern was that they had voting machines on buses. And I've always been under the opinion that voting machines had to be stationary in a specific location. And now we're seeing, you know, snapshots of them set up in parking lots. And I don't know if that's true or not, because we've heard so much fiction or not knowing what's true and what's not true. But I did want to ask that as another question, if they might could, you know, answer to that. And finally, I will say that his comments that the federal laws are some things that have given us so much angst and over the years about how we craft legislation for security and voting. Don't know what we can do to get around some of that federal legislation, but at the same time, one of the problems that I see is that every county runs their elections. You know, a great misconception, and it was a misconception 2 years ago when all of the discussion about disenfranchisement and voter suppression and all of that was that the local boards of election run the elections. Secretary of State's Elections Division only oversees based on the state law. And that's it. Maybe it's time that we move to the next step of creating a more unified, seamless process so that these boards of elections are in fact doing what they need to be doing. And if not, they need to have their hands called on it, because I'm of the opinion, and it's only my opinion, but that with the various boards of elections, when the change in the exact match came down back in March, that gave more latitude. Certainly not what a lot of people thought it was, but it did give latitude that those local boards of elections, if they predominantly lean one direction or another, then they might not be quite as concerned about doing the exact match. But hopefully we'll change a lot of that with the legislation, with a real ID type deal. So that being said, those are my questions for right now.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm happy to respond. Blackman.
Yes, sir. Please do.
So, first of all, Chairman Powell, I think you've kind of been proven correct on your no vote for no excuse absentee. So I thank you for that. I know probably a lot of county election officials would as well. Your question about private money. Yes, we provided some grants to counties for drop boxes and other and for personal protective equipment. The grants that we provided came from the CARES funds provided by the federal government, and then some third-party groups also provided grants for election officials this year. Our office does not oppose not allowing those third-party groups to provide those grants to counties in the future. I would say that it will probably require some counties to then increase their funding of their elections office. So that's gonna be a consequence. But I do think, given the it's really about appearances and making sure that there's really no bias or anything else in from either side in these counties. In terms of, you asked about mobile or the voting buses that Fulton County has. Yes, Fulton County does have those buses. My understanding, those were new this year. They never had them before. I don't think they even had them for the primary, so they were new for November. The idea was, from my understanding, to be able to supplement voting at certain locations. And we have seen places where, based on natural disasters or whatever else, a polling place has essentially gone down. And having a mobile unit, if that happens on election day, I think could be a really good thing. The fact that the polling place is contained within this bus, I think does raise some concerns. You can't park the bus anywhere. It's still got to be in an approved polling place or approved early voting location. If it was not, then that would not be a legal location. And what we're investigating, we got complaints about the Fulton County mobile buses. What we're looking at is everywhere that they're having it an approved voting location. For early voting, it's got to be either a government building or an election day polling place. And based on where they are, it looks like they are complying with that. But Fulton County does have those, so that is correct. And you asked about the signature audit too, and yes, we're looking forward to conducting that. You mentioned, is there kind of difference in counties and how they apply it, and that was the reason why it was challenged. Based on my conversations with county election officials, they don't like the signature match because there is a level of subjectivity into whether or not it, the law says whether or not it appears to be valid. And there's certainly a level of subjectivity in that. So I think that's another reason why we should move away from that as a way to verify absentee ballots to something that's objective.
Thank you, Representative Oliver.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is very helpful, and I want to follow up on Representative Gravely's suggestion that we have some written summary. Did I understand, am I correct that President Trump's chief of staff visited the site of signature match investigations in Georgia yesterday?
That's correct.
And was the Secretary of State Raffensperger notified that he'd be coming?
We were notified about 5 minutes before he showed up. I think we were notified when the Secret Service showed up for their advance work.
What was the purpose of his visit, to the extent Chief of Staff Meadows communicated that purpose to Secretary of State Raffensperger?
I'm not aware. I don't believe that the Secretary and Mr. Meadows spoke. The way that the signature match audit was being conducted, it was in the Cobb Civic Center. And obviously that's a public building, but we had a room where we were conducting it that was not public. Chief of Staff Meadows was not allowed in the room. He was able to look in the door, basically like anybody else would have been able to do.
And he stayed about 15 minutes, is that correct?
I'm not sure.
Your summary of the evaluations of rejected votes from November 3rd based on signature match, I want to make sure, this is why a written summary would be helpful. You said there were about 5,000 that were flagged in some way as failing to satisfy signature match, and they came. Do you have a geographic analysis of whether or not they came from, last time we were told from earlier elections, they disproportionately were coming from Gwinnett County. What is your geographic analysis of these 5,000? And secondly, how many of those 5,000 were cured?
So I can share with you and the committee the geographic breakdown from each county. In 2018, yes, they were primarily coming from Gwinnett County. That was not the case at this with these, but I can share with you the breakdown. Let's see, I have those numbers written down somewhere. So the 5752, that includes both that's the entire bucket of ballots that were initially flagged as, hey, there's a problem with the signature, either no signature or a non-matching signature. 2,700 of those were cured by the voter. So the remaining about 3,000 were rejected.
That's what I was trying to remember. About a little less than half were cured. In relation to the approximately 3,000, this is 3,000 out of 5 million right now, voters right now, we're looking at from November 3rd.
1.3 approximately absentee by mail voters. 1.3 million.
Yeah, that's correct for that correction. In relation to these approximately 3,000, I would like some more information, and I bet you have it already in this written in a way that you can give to us as to those 3,000 that were ultimately rejected. Was the voter contacted? Did the voter respond? I'd like to know where the contests were. We are going to have what looks to me like a fairly serious political contest or fight over this issue, and I want to put it in context that it's 3,000 out of 1.3 million voters, that it may be disproportionately taking up our time when we could be helping people do something else. So thank you, Mr. Germany. A written analysis of your investigation would be very helpful because the numbers really matter to me. Thank you.
That's a good point. Thank you, Representative. And if you look across every state for issues with signature matching, it is a very, very small percent of the absentee by mail voters, and that's across every state.
I understand it's consistent nationally, and it's just taking up an enormous amount of our time and energy on an issue that is relatively small. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Representative Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question for the counselor is regarding the much discussed issue of signature match and verification. And my questions go toward any extent to which Georgia law was changed by what has been referred to as a settlement agreement or a consent decree, and also how that was carried out. Was there an order of the court in the federal case? Was it simply a settlement agreement of the parties? How did the Secretary of State communicate this to the various counties as to any potential changes in the signature verification process? And I know that the Secretary of State occasionally does something that I call advisory memos to the counties on how they have to proceed. And if that's what it was, you can tell me the proper name of that. Was that communication between the Secretary of State and the boards of elections on the signature verification something that they had to follow? It was mandatory, or was it simply a best practices suggestion? Does my question make sense, Mr. Germany?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was a settlement agreement entered into by the parties. It was not a consent order or consent decree entered by the court. In return, the plaintiffs agreed to dismiss all of their claims, release all of their, release us from any kind of future claims about those issues, and we did not pay any attorney's fees. And then through the settlement agreement. About your question about the advisory, we call them official election bulletins, and they come from our office and go to each county board. And we sent one out saying, hey, here is our recommended process as a best practice to do this. And basically that's how it works. As you pointed out, county election boards are the superintendents of elections in each county. We try to provide them support and guidance, and that's what our official election bulletins are.
Is it mandatory that they follow these as if it's a statute?
It's mandatory they follow state law and SED regulations. And we believe that what we send them is the best way to do that. If they disagree, then what really drives the issue is are they following state law, state election board regulations? Those are what's mandatory. Our official election bulletins are meant to be helpful to help them do that.
So as the secretary sends out a communication in this fashion to the various boards of election, has he or can he, by doing that, mandate that they follow that, or is it simply the Board of Elections discretion as to what the statute is and how they must follow it? Does my question make sense?
Yes, it's their discretion and their obligation to follow law. Ours is meant to be helpful. If they disagree with it, then it's not. You don't get pulled in front of the state election board for not following an official election bulletin, but you do for not following state law or state election board regulation.
My last question, if I may, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Germany, you may or may not be able to comment on this depending on any litigation. There has been discussion about Coffee County, Georgia, and the Board of Elections there, and issues as to whether or not they certified election results, and issues as to whether or not the voting machines properly recorded votes in races. And are you able to comment on what that is all about and the status of that?
Yes, sir. Thank you. So yes, after about the same time as y'all's last meeting on these, our investigators went down to Coffee County to basically see what the issue was. There were some things that were said at the last meeting that were not true. I think one of them being they couldn't visit our office, we wouldn't call them back. We actually had a tech on the way to their office that Friday afternoon that they had called us, but they had already left for the day. So I think there was some stuff about that was not exactly accurate. And then the next week we sent our investigators down there to see, okay, what exactly happened. What we saw is that she had that video of, oh, here's how you could go change votes. The director confirmed to our investigators that she in fact did not do that they followed the process, that she was not aware of anybody who did that or had any evidence that anyone in Georgia had not followed the adjudication process, which requires a Democrat, Republican, and an election official to conduct those adjudications. And then in terms of her results, my understanding is they did certify their recount results. They had an issue where it looked like they had, I think, maybe scanned one batch of ballots twice in the recount. And so they had 50 extra ballots from the recount than they had from their initial result. And I believe they were able to find and rectify that prior to submitting us their certified recount results.
And once again, understanding that ongoing litigation, you are obviously the right person to know whether or not you can or cannot respond to this. But as I understand it, there has been a request to examine the voting machines in Coffee County with proponents of a lawsuit that make the accusation that they are somehow not properly recording the votes. Is there a availability for an outside group challenging this, the efficiency of a proper working of the voting machine to actually have one set aside where their quote unquote expert could actually examine the machine and if so run tests? Well, obviously with someone from Coffee County or the Secretary of State's office being there to supervise, I guess I would say.
Yes, that's something that we do try to put together in litigation. Normally, third parties are not allowed to access the voting equipment, the voting servers, or anything like that. That's in state election board regulation. We have had a lot of litigation over the machines since they've been adopted. We're now seeing, of course, we're now seeing different detractors, but they're making the same claims about the machines that have been made. Our position has always been, let's set up a fair inspection where both parties are present, where it's videotaped, where the rules of engagement are agreed upon, and then we'll go forward kind of with the court's approval. What we disagree with is any kind of sort of unilateral access from people who really seem to have a certain result they want to reach. So we're happy to. That's been our consistent position in court.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Nguyen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a couple of questions, and I want to start off with just earlier testimony that we heard from Mr. Secretary. He testified that absentee voting opens the door for voter fraud and suggested that we eliminate the 2005 policy that Republicans, with the exception of Chairman Powell, put into place to allow no excuse absentee voting. The Secretary of State's office did open an absentee ballot fraud task force ahead of the election to ensure safe and secure elections. And some of the reports I read, the number of cases that the SOS has referred to the Attorney General's office is roughly 130 potential invalid voting cases. Roughly 5 million voters cast their ballots in the general election. We know not all of these cases are specific to mail-in ballots. Even so, as a whole, that's still just 0.0026%, 130 potential cases against 5 million voters. If there's no evidence as it pertains to fraud and absentee ballot voting, and the SOS proactively sent out applications to vote by mail in the primary because we are in fact in a pandemic, and this is a voting method widely used by voters on both sides of the aisle, why would the Secretary of State try to eliminate the no excuse absentee ballot voting?
So the number of investigations you referenced is not related to like a number of voters. For instance, we open an investigation, it could have to do with, it might have to do with no voters, it might just be a county issue. But then, for if it's felon voters, it's going to be one investigation. For the number of illegal votes that have been alleged by the Trump campaign, we have an investigation into that, and they're alleging it affects a lot of voters. So that's comparing that to number of votes cast is not really accurate in terms of a number. I think what we have seen this year is, I think everyone agrees, I think on both sides, that to the extent there is any fraud in the process, it's in, and fraud, to me, I said before, is not the best word, because a lot of times it's not, fraud kind of envisions like someone actively trying to do something wrong. Whereas a lot of times that's not what we see. We see, particularly this year, with people who are out of state, if they get something from a third party group saying, "Oh, you can vote in Georgia," they might say, "Oh, great! I didn't know I could." Now I don't know if that's like intentional fraud, but it's still an illegal vote potentially, and the effect is the same, kind of regardless of the intent. I know when I'm talking to people and I'm explaining the process, what for in-person early voting and for in-person voting, we have really good, I think, explanations of here's exactly how we know everything we're hearing from that place for in-person voting or for election day voting. Here's how we know it's accurate. For absentee voting, it occurs outside the confines of any voting location, and then of course you've got the kind of subjective nature of the verification process in the county function. So like when we're talking about that, it's frankly harder to provide confidence in that process than it is any other process. Now, like you said, it's an important way of voting. But there's a lot of states that have an excuse-based system. You can still utilize that way of voting if you need to, but if not, especially with Georgia's 3 weeks of early voting, I think the way our laws are set up, the way our elections offices are set up in each county, it's not set up to have a massive absentee by mail system like we have this year.
So you had another two questions?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I do.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Germany, I do want to refer back to something else the Secretary of State mentioned and something that you brought up before too, which is the inability to clean up voter rolls because of federal laws. So in 2019, the Secretary of State did clean up voter rolls and remove over 300,000 Georgians off the voter rolls. And of these voters that have been removed, it's alleged that up to 198,000 of these voters still live in the state of Georgia. But I will use the more conservative number. We know that at least 22,000 of those voters were wrongly removed, and they did have to be reinstated by the Secretary of State. So based on this error and based on the Secretary of State's willingness to create an absentee voter fraud task force, what are the steps the Secretary of State is taking to ensure that eligible voters are not disenfranchised?
So the steps that we take before anyone's moving the rolls are set out in both Georgia law and federal law. The first step, there's basically three things that could generate a confirmation card from our office before you're moving the rolls. It's either you file a national change of address notification with the post office, your county elections office gets returned mail from your address, or you've had no contact with the election system anyway for, I believe it's 5 years. If that's the case, then what's generated is a confirmation card that goes to the voter, and the confirmation card says, hey, are you still there? If you are, return this, or send us your updated information. And if that card is not returned to the elections office within 40 days, that voter is moved to inactive status. A voter stays in inactive status for 2 general election cycles. So the people that we removed in 2019, pursuant to that process, they had been identified under one of those processes in 2015. And frankly, I think that's why the allegations that are being made that are just not accurate about all these people weren't on the NCOA notice. Well, they were in 2015 when we looked at it. And the guy who's saying that is basically, he's kind of well known, I think, for just throwing out numbers that aren't accurate. So, that's kind of what I was going back to, like, both sides are doing that. They throw out numbers that aren't accurate, and it's really not helpful. it's not new, you know, but it's persistent. But I do think we really need to kind of think about what effect we have on the overall system by throwing out inaccurate numbers, whether it's of people removed or whether it's of illegal votes. So I got myself off track, but basically, and then in 2019 we took the step. Well, we did two things. One, we passed in 2019. You guys passed a law requiring a final notice to those people in 2019 after you've been sitting there for 2 general election cycles. If you're in inactive status and you vote or have any contact with the system, you're moved back to active status. You know, those people in 2015, they didn't vote in 16 or 18 or have any contact, and then they were removed in 19. Prior to them being removed, they received another call saying, hey, are you still there? And if you are, you know, go do this so you can update your status. And then finally, after all of that, you are removed from the rolls. And again, so that's what we had to do to remove people who we identified in 2015 probably aren't here anymore. I think there's studies that show how many people move every year. And I think that's really part of the problem is, you know, the way these federal laws were passed, we have a much more kind of mobile society. We have a much more information can be received a lot quicker now than it could in 1992 or 3 when these federal laws were passed. So, you know, we are certainly not removing too many people from the rolls. You know, there's people who have moved since 2015 who are still on our rolls, basically. A lot of people. And the law errs on that side, that's fine. When you then go to a massive absentee system, like we went to this year due to COVID, then it certainly is going to raise potential concerns. I think that's what we're seeing now.
And then, Mr. Chair, I just have a couple more questions, and these are just yes or no questions because some of these things were brought up into the in the prior committee hearing. And
yes, ma'am, you can ask those. I just want to real quick mention to our folks here that are answering questions and asking is that I think everybody on the committee has questions. So as succinct as we could possibly be, obviously this is extremely important, very serious, and we want to try to get to as many questions as we possibly can. So please proceed, Ms.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Germany, you mentioned, we did verify previously, it is legal for counties to employ mobile voting units as long as they make sure they're in the right places. Is it legal for voters with disabilities to receive assistance with voting?
To receive assistance with voting, you have to either be unable to read the English language or have a physical disability. Yes.
Is it legal for both the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, and other third-party entities to assist with ballot curing?
You know, the devil's kind of in the details on that. It depends on how that happens.
And have you found any evidence to suggest that mobile voting units or voting through secure drop boxes increases the number of voter fraud cases?
Mobile voting, you know, we have investigation on that right now. I don't think so on that. In terms of drop boxes, you know, we get a lot of complaints. What we've investigated so far, when we get an allegation of, someone dropped off a ton of ballots here, which would not be allowed, probably, depending on who that person was. We pulled the videotape and the video surveillance, and what we have seen so far, we have not substantiated any of those claims.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Germany. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Collins, are you on the call? And then we'll have Representative Turner, and then.
I wonder what this looks like with captions on. It's just a bunch of and
Can you hear me now, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir. You're
okay. We're good.
Fire away.
Okay. My question for Mr. Germany is, I know there's been a lot of accusations made about deceased voters that have voted in the election. And I know that you're working on clearing some of that up. My question to you is, how often does the Secretary of State office informed of those who have passed away? Do you rely on the Department of Public Health to send you the vital records death notice? Or do you rely on the Social Security office at the federal level to notify you of a death? How does that work?
Question. We get every month a list from the Bureau of Vital Statistics through the Department of Public Health, and that's shared with the counties every month. Well, first it's matched against the voter rolls, and then it's shared with counties for them to basically work the people that have been identified as having died. Based on legislation you guys passed in 2019, we were able to join ERIC, and ERIC provides us data, provides us Social Security death database. And so, we're implementing that right now, and that will maybe catch some additional people who Vital Statistics does not catch. And that's in process. And I think we've shared that in other counties as well for this upcoming election.
Okay, thank you. I had a few other questions, but they were answered by some other asked by other members. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I would just say one more thing. Some of the restrictions on removing people, those do not apply to dead people or to people who are convicted of felonies in Georgia. That continues to happen monthly in an election year. The restrictions are on removing people who have moved.
Representative Turner, if you don't mind, I've got a request. Our Vice Chairman Jones has got to leave the call briefly in a few minutes, and if you want to go ahead, Representative Jones, thank you, Representative Turner, and we'll proceed down the line after that.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Representative Turner. I sure do appreciate that, and my apologies to the committee for my hard stop. Mr. Germany, just for the spirit of time, I'm happy to get these to you by writing, but could we, just for the committee's sake, if we could I'll do kind of a quick question, if you could kind of give a general quick answer for timing purposes, is that okay?
Maybe.
Understood. All right, I like the fact that you understood. I led you there. We have done a significant amount of data scrubbing. And where we see around mail-in ballots specifically, the challenge, and also with Election Day and early in-person voting, is around the NCOA, which for those of you who don't know who are listening, that's the change of address form that we do with the United States Postal Service. We have seen a little over 15,000 Georgians who put in a change of address to an out-of-state address who still voted in the election in the general. Now, we don't necessarily believe that means that all 15,000 were illegal. That's not the statement that I am making. However, it does at least raise the question of that needs to be questioned to ensure those individuals were in fact Georgians and they were not now someone who lives in North Carolina, Oregon, New York, etc. So here we go. So the first 6 questions are around the NCOA, if that's okay. As brief as you can you walk us through just the standard NCOA process that the Secretary's office uses in terms of putting them from active to inactive?
Yeah, that's a great question. One thing I would point out at the beginning, we pointed out in court why even that 15,000 number is not accurate. So that's not an accurate starting point for, okay, what's the potential of people who moved out of state? The reason for that is data matching is not an exact science. And especially when you don't have, we have some private information that we're able to assist with our data matching that these outside companies are not. And to the extent that they are able to add it from other commercial sources, it's not necessarily as accurate. So
no, we agree. We don't have, and that's why I said I'm starting with the assumption of 15. You guys have access to data that we're not allowed to have, and we understand why we're not allowed to have that data. But at least for us, the starting number was a little over 15, and we understand it's going to get whittled down. That's why you're not hearing from my office a proclamation, oh, there's 15,000 illegal voters. That is not the statement we're making, but we're trying to understand how that's whittled down. So I think a quick walkthrough of the NCOA would be helpful.
So what we look at, especially, it might be better if I kind of what we're looking at from an investigatory standpoint as to what we normally do from a list maintenance standpoint.
Yep.
What we're looking at for November based on people who are potentially no longer Georgia residents. Is we use the NCOA. I think we can do a little bit better data matching than outside groups can do. Again, even ours is not perfect because the NCOA does not have, like a private information necessarily. So we whittle it down to that. And then we look at other things. So first of all, one thing that number does not take out is overseas military voters. For those people who expect to see, we expect that they do not live in Georgia anymore. That's, basically part of it. So we can, you can back them out. You can also look at, from an investigative standpoint, who voted absentee by mail versus who voted in person, either early or on election day. If you voted early in person or on election day, you might have come to Georgia, for that particular purpose of just voting. But to me, it's a decent indication that you still live. So you can look at that, and then that gets it down even more just by folks who voted out of state or who voted by mail. And then when you look at that, then you've got to get to that's what really we're starting with. And then we'll get into individualized investigation of, are they still a Georgia resident? And it goes through that whole list of things that you might be a Georgia resident and not live here. Big ones are our college kids, basically, or if you're otherwise in school, and then temporary relocation. And then the final one that you see quite a bit of in that small number is addresses that look like, vacation home address. And so then that gets, kind of complicated as well. So that's how we whittle it down and then get to, okay, how are we going to individually investigate each of these?
Yeah, I think our challenge has been, even with our, I'll say, limited resources that we don't have, we've been able to actually track individuals moving out of state and actually seeing that those individuals have literally lived there. They have a mortgage now. They registered their kids in school, etc. To your point, that's not a vacation home. That's not, hey, I need to leave this state for 60 days or 90 days or even a half a year to take care of my mom who's ill. That's, to me, an indication that they now live in that state when they're registering their kids in school. They have a mortgage at that, for a home. They have a job, etc. Second is real quick, and again, if it's easier to send us the data, can you walk us through when there is an NCOA hit, is that considered to be probable cause to basically trigger, I'll just say, at least research to determine if that individual should be moved to inactive status?
So for our list maintenance, what that generates for us is a confirmation card that we then send to the voter and say, hey, are you still here or are you not still here? If that confirmation card is not returned, or if it's returned and says, oh yes, now I live out of state, then that, so the NCOA triggers the confirmation card. The confirmation card then triggers the further action.
Okay.
That's how we do it under federal and state law.
We look back at the voter rolls, basically last 5 years. And we saw something in April 2019. And again, happy to get the detail via email. But what was interesting was, on average, we were seeing up to April 2019, about 4,200 people move from active to inactive based on the NCOA. And after April 2019, we saw that number drop to about circa 120. So about a 90% drop. Is that because we provided through statute ERIC? Is that because a different process? We've seen it move, like I said, prior to 2019, April 2019, that number was up in the 4,000s. Now it's around 120, since we assumed it was a judgment. We assumed it was ERIC, but it's something, or maybe we're completely wrong and we didn't know if maybe you knew the trigger point for that.
Yeah, so we run the NCOA process in odd numbered years. Every odd numbered year, we run the NCOA process.
Right.
So we wouldn't have run it probably since about then.
Okay, so when we saw that number staying pretty consistent in even number years, 18, 16, because we didn't go back all the way to 14. So we did see it in 16 and 18. That's something that maybe offline we can have that conversation, because we did not see clearly, if we would have seen I'll say a trend line that showed odd at 4,000 and something each month, and then down and then back up.
I'm happy to look at, we're happy to look at what that
All right. I'd like to do that just in the spirit of intellectual honesty. Next thing on the machines, and when I say the machines, about marking, and then also the scanners, do we have contractually the ability to do a forensic audit on those?
By we mean the state?
The state, yeah.
Yes, we do. And in fact, we did do an audit after the election, random machines in certain counties to confirm that the hash value of those machines was what we expected to see. We do significant testing on the machines prior to acceptance, and then counties do testing pre-election called logic and accuracy testing, and then we did the step of at post-election, and then we did the post-election audit. So I think that's something that we could do, but I would say that all the stuff about the machines not working is basically completely not true. And I think there are real issues that we need to get to your previous question, and this one is frankly not real.
Fair enough, Mr. Germany. I understand that. I'm just asking if contractually we had the ability. You answered my question, so thank you. Election data stored in Georgia, remains in Georgia, or does it ever transmit outside of Georgia?
Election data is stored on the election management server at each county. It's never come to the internet, it's air gap. Physical data and also backups are stored in Superior Court under seal at each county.
Okay, all right. In terms of the mobile voting, you mentioned something that I think was pretty interesting, and I want to just do something real quick. And just to relay a point that's being made, and I appreciate this data being shared. Can you see my screen, Mr. Germany?
Yes.
Yeah, so we took a look at, based on Fulton County's website, on where the voting was going to be, if you can see column B. And then we basically took a breakdown of those precincts. Then we basically did in column J, the nearest polling location. And then just based on GIS data, just did a distance. So to your point about them being within the physical locations of a precinct, I'm happy to share this spreadsheet with you so that you can validate, because there's nothing, we understand you'd want to trust but validate this information. But you'll see that the closest we had was about a quarter of a mile. The furthest we had was circa seven miles. And this is something that we're not suggesting. We want to make sure we laud the efforts of making sure that all voters are able to vote, all legal citizens are able to vote. But at the same time, we want to make sure that we understand where the mobile, I'll say, RVs are being placed, how they're being placed, why they're being placed. If for no other reason, it's just important from an SOP standpoint. So if you'd like, would you like me to share this spreadsheet with you?
And so what I said, using the mobile buses for early voting can take place at either a government building or an election day polling place.
Right.
So,
and yep. And forgive me, I stopped sharing just because I didn't want to, but this was basically what was in general. Yep. Okay. Nope. Completely understand. The next thing is, and sorry about this, Mr. Chairman, I'm almost done. In terms of the local challenges that are being done right now, there is there's not a consistency in the application that the election boards are applying to Chairman Powell's statement. And is that something that the Secretary of State can provide guidance to the election boards in terms of where the burden of proof lies versus there being such an inconsistent statement being made to the citizens of Georgia who are making these challenges?
Sure. And so we met with the people who are, at least one group who's doing challenges. And I told them, I said, look, by casting a really wide net, you are potentially letting people not find probable cause here. And that's what they decided to do. So the way that election challenges work in Georgia is you can challenge someone's, whether or not their votes should count in the next election based on their eligibility to vote. And then what you have to show to the county board, and it's to the county board of elections, is probable cause. And if the county board determines probable cause, then if that voter then votes, it goes to a hearing where the challenger has the burden of showing that voter no longer has the qualifications to vote. So that's how that process works. And from my understanding, some counties are not finding probable cause based on information submitted, but that's really based on the information submitted and then the county board's determination.
Okay. Two last questions. One is, and this is quick, you can email it to me. Can you get me the statute that supports mobile voting, please?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Well, the regulation that supports the mobile voting.
Not really supporting. It's a question of, is it legal or illegal?
That's what I'm asking.
That makes it illegal.
Say that again, Mr. Germany.
It's something that makes it illegal. This was not something that like we okayed, but it's a question of when we look at it, is it illegal?
Mm-hmm.
So there's nothing in law that supports it. It says it's okay.
Right.
There's nothing in law that says it's illegal either.
Saying it's not prohibited.
So there's the absence there. There's a vacuum of statutory guidance. Is that correct, Mr. Germany?
Well, I think that's something that you guys in the assembly.
Right. And that's essentially what I'm trying to get at. And then last but not least, during the conversations on the settlement, which I know some people call a consent decree, and you cleared that up for everyone, calling it a settlement. Was there any discussions around moving away from signature match and moving to ID?
Not at that point that I can recall.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chairman Blackman.
Thank you, Representative Jones. Representative Turner.
Thank you. A moment ago, you made a sort of a generalized comment about the guy who's saying the 15,000, I guess the 15,000 number was throwing things out that you think he's famous for being inaccurate for. Did I hear that correctly before I move on with this question? Because it's kind of predicated on how I proceed here.
I was talking about the guy that Representative Wynn brought up, who's throwing about 200,000 people were not, were incorrectly removed. That guy throwing out numbers for years about removals that are not accurate.
Okay. So there have been different data analysis is done by various people, one of which Mr. Brainerd came to our committee a couple weeks ago, and he presented a number of 15,700 folks. And I guess we're working kind of with that number. Are you aware that they had already scrubbed that number to remove military overseas ballots? Our
experts have reviewed that as well and submitted declarations in court explaining why it's inaccurate. And I'm happy to send those to you as well.
Okay, I would like to see that because when you have different data analysts coming up with the same conclusions, it is a red flag. There was a story made public this week that the Secretary's office has sent out 8,000 or so notifications for people who are potentially out of state and not qualified to vote in the January 5th. How did we arrive at that number?
What we did to arrive at that number is looked at people who have filed an out-of-state NCOA and have also requested an absentee ballot. And what we sent them was, a letter that I'm happy to share with the committee that says, as a reminder, you have to be an eligible Georgia resident to vote. You might be, they very well might be, but they might not be. And so that was why we took that step.
And how did you arrive at selecting those individuals to be notified?
So we ran the list of people who filed an out-of-state NCOA and people who have requested an absentee ballot for the January 5th election. Took out, I think, overseas military voters.
Okay. Can you describe any details that you're able to share about the complaint that led you to, or led the office to decide to investigate the signature audit process in Cobb County?
Sure. We got a complaint on November 23rd. I just looked at that because you asked me the date was. There was an allegation from someone who had worked at Cobb County in the primary. I think she was an employee of a different section, and they had pulled in people to help because of the increase in absentee voting in Cobb County. She said that they were checking signatures on absentee ballot applications, and then for ones that didn't match, they put them in a different pile, which is entirely appropriate. The problem was when she said that later in the day, our supervisor told us just to process that pile of non-match signatures as well. So that was the thing. I think we had opened an investigation on that on the same day that we received the complaint. Our investigation, we reached out to Cobb County, see, okay, what can you tell us about this? We identified the supervisor who was alleged to have done that. Got a statement from him, and then we'll also speak to the complainant. I'm not sure if he's done that yet at this point. But that's part of the investigation. That's the investigation that led us to conduct the signature audit in Cobb County.
And you mentioned that the complaint for that was received on November 23rd. Are you aware that some members of this committee and several members of the House sent a letter on the 28th encouraging the Secretary of State to engage in a signature audit?
I don't dispute that.
Okay. Well, if you're not, you may not be aware, but members of this committee, as well as other members of the House, did send a letter to the Secretary of State on the 28th of November requesting that a signature audit be engaged. For members of the committee and for the members of the public, I never received a written response. I did receive a verbal response acknowledging receipt of the letter, along with a verbal explanation that the Secretary of State's office did not have authority to do the signature audit. And that was the justification for not moving forward. Again, given to me verbally, but not in writing by the staff there at Secretary of State's office in a discussion that was held the week after Thanksgiving. So what changed? Why were you able to begin to do the signature audit after a lot of us had been requesting it in advance of the decision to make it?
So I think a lot of the requests that we got had a lot to do with why we ended up doing that. Our goal is to try to do everything we can to so that people can have confidence in the election results. And this has obviously been a big point of contention. What we are seeing, the type of complaint that I mentioned, and we received it from the Republican Party, we've asked them, when they requested the audit that you guys also requested, send us any evidence that you have that this process was not properly done or that there's a problem here. And the only thing we've received is a complaint about absentee ballot applications in the primary in Cobb County. So that's why we're investigating that. We have, upon what we're looking at and asking anyone else to send us, we have not received any allegations that this was not properly done in the general election.
This guy's a terrible live speaker.
Or complaints of fraud or irregularity. So that's what we were asking for, and we have not received them. I guess upon taking another look, we do have the authority to investigate election administration issues. And so that's not a typical thing that we do without a specific complaint, because these are law enforcement investigations. Our investigators are post-certified officers, and they show up to question you or whoever's. And so, I do think we need to be careful about how we open investigations because of all the complaints. There's not complaints, but all the requests to do this, including, for instance, the president. Then we decided for sort of the the best, right, the best, so what am I trying to say? We want to provide everybody the most confidence that they can have in the election results. And so that's why we're.
Thank you. I actually appreciate that it's being done. I think it's necessary because every part of this election should be verified and also areas of improvement be identified. And I think it'll go a long way for that. So I commend the office for deciding to do it. And I know it's going to be a tedious process. And a lot of people think it's a silver bullet that will allow us to try to change the results of this election. And that's not it at all. What it will do is allow us to identify if it's working. If it's not working, then the legislature has an obligation to act. I believe in that. Thank you for moving forward with it. If there is in your bullet points as you develop those, or if you could add, if there are areas in legislation that need to be improved to strengthen the ability to perform that aspect of verification, I would ask that you make those recommendations for the legislature to take action on. We talked a lot about the Coffee County thing. My only question there is, watching the video during the hearing that we saw on the 10th, there was a lot of stuff that we just couldn't refute everything if it was, I mean, a lot was thrown at us. It was almost a 9-hour meeting. And watching the video from Coffee County about the adjudication process, which was alarming for a lot of people. If somebody were to change votes the way it was described in that video, would that person go to jail? That person would be breaking the law as it's written, and they would be going to jail if they tried to do that. And because we have paper ballots, the paper would tell the story later on if they did try to software change those ballots. Is that correct?
Well, and the audit logs in the system would show when what happened. So that person, I think, would be caught. And I would certainly, support prosecution of that person.
Changing gears again, and I'm sorry, we have a lot of different questions. And Chairman, again, as my caveat, if you need to interrupt me, go ahead. But I have a question around Fulton County and the chain of custody paperwork. There have been public reports made that Fulton County will not provide chain of custody paperwork until sometime in January. Can you speak to that?
I cannot speak to that.
Okay. Does anybody in your office have any insight that they can offer to the committee regarding that decision by Fulton County?
We can follow up with Fulton and see what the issue is. My guess is it has to do with, because I know we're under the same sort of onslaught of open records requests. And, frankly, it's just, that's kind of where we are as well in terms of trying to provide records to everyone based on kind of the order in which they were received.
Okay, because that is a concern I believe what we have established here as a common goal is confidence in the election and results, and transparency is definitely a part of what builds that confidence. So I would like to have something from the office describing the condition of that request for the chain of custody paperwork, so that people can see it for themselves and draw their own conclusions. You had mentioned.
Can I jump in real quick?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I know you've probably got a number of questions. I just want to try to get to everybody.
Yeah, sure.
We can. So, anything you can do to kind of speed them up or kind of close, come to a close, I would appreciate it.
I'll tell you what. I'll pass the baton, and somebody else can take a turn if there's time later. I'd ask at that point, if at your discretion, Mr. Chairman.
Certainly, Representative Turner. Be glad to kind of give you some additional time at the end when we get there. Representative Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have 3 questions, but anybody from the Secretary of State's office can answer these 3 questions. But before I have my questions, I just want to make a comment on something that Mr. Germany said earlier today and also in the Senate hearings. You mentioned that complaints about voter fraud and voter suppression are similar, particular in Georgia. that is something that is particularly offensive to folks who have, there's been a history of voter suppression in this country. I mean, it led to the Voting Rights Act, and for folks who actually lived through the civil rights movement, we know that there's a well-documented history of voter suppression, whereas voter fraud is mostly a theme that has been pretty much promoted by Republicans that consistently lacks evidence. So I would just encourage you to think about that as you continue to say that in meetings, and hope that you would not. My first question is, we know that the voting by absentee balloting is definitely I think it's a difficult process. There's a lot of hoops you have to jump through. There's a lot of areas where you can get tripped up. And if you don't actually track your ballot in the system, then you easily could not have your vote counted. But you've mentioned, the Secretary of State mentioned that he believes that not having a stated reason that you want to use the absentee balloting process potentially leads to fraud. Just what evidence or what specific proof do you have in Georgia or in any state that not having a stated reason leads to fraud?
So I'll answer the first one first. What I was referring to is what we saw after 2018 and what we're seeing after 2020. And I'll just speak for myself, what I saw, because I was in the same place in both of them. We saw people making complaints saying, oh, this happened to me, this was my experience, and that's voter suppression. And a lot of times what it was, when we have 4 million people vote or 5 million people vote like this year, there are going to be people that for some reason or another, they have some inconvenience in the process. Their information might not be up to date. There might be an error at the polls by the poll workers who are only human. And so what we saw after 2018 was people saying, oh, this happened to me, and this was suppression. And then what we're seeing after 2020 was kind of the same fact pattern. We're saying, oh, this happened to me when I went to vote, and that's fraud. And so that's what I was referring to. And I think we need to be careful, like you said, of minimizing any of those issues. But by throwing stuff out that's not either of those issues, that's basically what we do. And I do think those sides are guilty of that. And I think that's what we've seen. That's what I've seen at least, in my position here. The other thing I would say is, I think when we want to set up from an election system is one that everyone has confidence in. And like I said earlier, when you go, in terms of in-person voting, everyone can have confidence in, I think, those results based on the way it works. Absentee voting is harder because of what it is. Now, that doesn't mean that there's widespread fraud there, and that's not what we're saying. But you guys don't have to have widespread fraud to make a change. I think what you should look at is what provides confidence to people. We're in a state where I think we're going to continue to have close elections, and we're going to continue to have very spirited, I think, responses on each side. And when we have a really close election like we did this year, it's really some of the processes, and a lot of election stuff are set up like this. The processes are designed to promote confidence. And we need to make sure all of our processes are set up that way.
But specifically, having to provide an excuse as to why you want to use absentee voting, how does that relate to an increase or decrease of fraud? What does that have to do with voter fraud potentially occurring in an election?
Well, again, like I said earlier,
by whatever avenue they deem as fit.
So like I said earlier, I don't think fraud is really the best word, because it implies an intentionality that we often don't see in these investigations. I do think kind of illegal votes is better because, I think we all agree that an illegal vote passed can cancel out a legal vote, and that's not okay. And you can cast an illegal vote if you no longer live here and you're eligible and not eligible to vote, but you vote. That's not allowed. Now, you might do it completely innocently. It might not be intentional. We're investigating people who voted both absentee and in person. in some of those, it seems to be completely innocent, where it's, a lot of times older people who were maybe confused and thought that it was a different election. So I don't want to call that fraud, but it's still not allowed. And those are the things that I think the system's got to be set up to, to protect from.
Okay, so to be clear, none of that has anything to do with providing a reason as to why you would want to use absentee voting, but I'll move on. You brought up voter confidence, which I'm glad you brought that up, because that actually goes to my second question. We know that there's no proof that the machines that are the Dominion voting machines were hacked in the November election, but we did know about the vulnerabilities of these machines before we got them. It was a reason that Democrats fought tooth and nail against this, and a few Republicans were not in support of getting the Dominion voting machines. And a lot of us really were advocating for hand-marked paper ballots because obviously they can't be hacked. We're in a situation now where we run elections and then we check on the back end to make sure that machines were not hacked. But I don't even know what we would do if we were to figure out that they had been hacked. I do think that, some of the reasons that we're having these committee meetings is that a lot of folks, their preferred candidate was not selected. Trump did not win the election. And so I think that the sheer vulnerability of the machines that we already knew about them before we got them, definitely gives people something to rely on when they don't get the result that they want in an election. Has there been any talk or any support from the Secretary of State's office about reconsidering going to hand-marked paper ballots? Because we know paper can't be hacked. We know with these Dominion machines, you still can't audit the intent of the voter.
So,
Ryan, can I answer that question? And I would just like to briefly say that if you used a hand-marked paper ballot, it would still be run through the same scanner that we're using right now, unless you're really suggesting to use hand-marked paper ballots with hand counting.
But the difference is with hand-marked paper ballots, you can audit the intent of the voter, where you can with these Dominion machines.
So, there's experts that say you cannot audit DMVs. There's experts that say that you can. Frankly, the experts that say that you cannot have been pretty quiet because those experts, I think, do like the result of this election. So we haven't been hearing from them. All the issues that we have seen have been with hand-marked paper ballots. So hand-marked paper ballots do not decrease issues. In fact, our experience is they increase issues. You have to deal with issues of voter intent. If you talk to any election official, they'll say the creative ways in terms of how voters mark their ballots can be very difficult to determine. And what we are finding is the same thing as signature verification. The less subjectivity you can have for election officials, the more confidence you can provide in the system. So the answer is no, it's not something we're considering. And I don't think it's something that the General Assembly should consider or should really move to either.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Chair, let me get, I know Representative Shannon had one final question. I believe she had 3 questions. Let me get to her question. I'll redirect back to you after she asks her question and gets answered.
Sure.
Thank you.
The final question is, and again, this goes to voter confidence. From the SOS's office, we've seen that the SOS has played up overstated investigations about 501c3 groups and their activities during the election. Yesterday, Mr. Sterling said on social media that illegal voting happens every day, which obviously folks look at that and probably assume that it's very widespread and that our elections are rife for fraud. In my opinion, all of this works to decrease voter confidence. And it's really sad that that is coming from the Secretary of State's office. I guess my question is, do you understand the connection between continuing the theme that illegal voting and that voter fraud is rampant or happening all the time? How that makes the public feel like our elections are rife with fraud, because that has even led to death threats for poll workers. The thought of fraud has led to death threats for many folks on this committee. It's led to death threats for folks in the Secretary of State's office. And it just really seems like you can't have it both ways. You can't continue with this thing, but then also run to the media and talk about death threats. Now, obviously, I don't condone death threats against any public official. We've all had them. They're all inappropriate. But it's kind of like you're perpetuating what's happening with the election. Do you understand that connection?
So what we're trying
She's so triggered.
information. And I think what we've been trying to say about the November election is, no, we do not see anything. Can you hear me? Sorry. Anything
Yeah, we-
that, in question the result of the election from a fraud or illegal votes perspective. You know, I think you know, so what we've been trying to say, and what I think experts on both sides would agree with, is that voter fraud, illegal votes are very rare. But that doesn't mean they're non-existent, and it doesn't mean that when it does happen, it's not important. And you know, I think you're going back to your discussion about voter suppression. An illegal vote suppresses the vote of a legal voter, and so you know it's not okay, even if it's, you know, unfortunately it's not from the protections that we already have in place around our system. It is certainly not widespread, and if it was widespread, we would be seeing things now that we don't see, that we're not seeing. Like, that's how we know, you know, that what we're looking at is, you know, a kind of an amount. I think the point that Gabe was trying to make was, there is no such thing as a perfect election. There's just not. But our election officials in Georgia overall do a great job, and I think they've done that same good work this year under very trying circumstances.
Right, but and just to close, you're making my point, which is just that there has not been any proof of widespread fraud. We know that. I do not for a second believe, with the way that Republicans have over and over talked
She sounds like she's about to call him a racist.
over the years, I don't for a second believe that if there was actual proof of fraud, that you wouldn't jump on it. I mean, I just don't believe that. So that's one of the things that gives me confidence that there was not widespread fraud in this election. But at the same time, like I said, continuing with themes of illegal voting happening every day, overstated investigations, it's concerning to me because it seems like that's a lot of partisan activity from the Secretary of State's office, which is funded by taxpayers. And you just can't have it both ways. So that's all.
And since you mentioned me specifically,
fraud, but we don't see wide margins either in Georgia. And so, you know, to minimize illegal voting is not something that we agree with in our office.
Sounds like they're about to jump on her.
Blackman.
Yeah, sure. Please go ahead, Mr. Sterling.
Specifically yesterday, it was illegal voting because there was a woman I bought my house from, and I had the evidence, and I'm following the process to go to Fulton County and challenge her ability to cast a legal vote because she signed an oath saying she lived in my house and could vote there. And that's just a specific example of it. And the whole point that Mr. Germany has made and Mr. Secretary has made is that there is always some level of illegal voting that occurs. We always have to work very hard to put up enough guardrails to stop that from happening. And we have specifically said, I remember in some of our early press conferences, I said, there is absolutely, we're going to find illegal votes because you always do. We have absolutely said, we've seen no evidence of widespread fraud, as Mr. Germany has pointed out and the Secretary has pointed out. We can hold both of these things in our minds at the same time, and they are both true. And the whole point of this office is we're trying to be as open and transparent and truthful about what we know, when we know it, and getting out to the public so they have an understanding. Because if you sit there and say no illegal voting happened at all, that strains credulity. If you say there was widespread voter fraud that flipped elections, that also strains credulity. So there is an ability to have both of these things in your head and think, and they can both be absolutely correct, both at the same time. And that's where reality lies.
Right, but
Turner.
Let me just close with this. I think that no one is saying that you are saying that there's absolutely no fraud in election. What we are saying is that there may be attempted fraud. It looks like our system captures that, but when you jump from there is illegal voting happening every single day, that makes people think that elections are rife with fraud, and that is the reason that we are in this situation right now, which is that folks' preferred candidate did not win the election. So now people immediately jump to proof of fraud and making up conspiracy.
You're right.
Mr. Turner, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of piggyback a little bit off of Representative Shannon's earlier comment about the hand-marked paper ballots. And just to clarify, I don't agree with everything that Representative Shannon has said, but this point is very key. Mr. Germany, how many hand-marked paper ballots were there in this election? And you're muted, by the way.
Right. There was 1.3 million approximately absentee ballots, and then I don't have the exact number of provisional ballots, but probably 10, I would guess another 10,000.
It's right at 10,000.
So 1.3 million hand-marked paper ballots, and of those 1.3 million hand-marked paper ballots, how many times did we have problems trying to discern the intent of the voter?
We would have to, talk to county election officials about that. When that happens, that goes through a vote review panel.
Right.
I would say that it's not, the vast majority, they're fine. But again, like I said to Shannon, in Georgia in elections, it can be, there can be a significance in a small amount of ballots.
Would you agree with the assertion that, I'm sorry.
Turner, no, excuse me. I know that we all have a ton of questions, but
okay,
after 11 o'clock, we're trying to keep this to 2 hours, and there are still people that have not gotten asked the first question, including myself. So I would like to recognize Representative Knight, who has a special case that he has asked to ask a couple of quick questions regarding, and so we have allowed him to be on the call with us today. Representative Knight, Chairman Knight.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to participate and to ask a few questions. First of all, going back to, as you started the meeting, was to get some updates on the specific investigations. As I know and probably several members know, Spaulding County's election on November 3rd was, all the way up to the national media of the failure that happened that morning. And then subsequent to that, things that we're seeing are coming out in investigation. So one thing I would like is to see if we could go back and get an update maybe on that investigation, any updates on that investigation. Second of all, I know and I'll defer to the chair on this, but as we were hearing the opening remarks and all, we talked about training and audits and from the GBI. As somebody who used to do audits, all audits are not created equal. I would tell you that I would, if the chair, asked the chair that maybe we request the scope and procedures of the specific audit. I think it's very important as the General Assembly goes forward in this to know, to look at those procedures. Also, you talked about.
Can you get us that? Can you get us that, Mr. Germany, Mr. Sterling? You can just thumbs up. Can you get us that, the request?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
The actual forensic report, and you can probably back figure from that. We got to make sure there's no security stuff in there if we release it publicly.
All right. Representative Knight, please.
All right, but also, and also there was training issues there. Talking about that the local elections had been trained. It'd be interesting to see the documentation of what local election supervisors completed that training. And then second of all, Mr. Chair, and again, I'll defer to you, but the copy of the contracts as we go forward to understand the relationship of the contracts and the vendors. But with that, going back to maybe an opportunity for Secretary of State to elaborate on any updates from the Spaulding County issues and investigation.
If you would, please. Do you have any that you can share with us?
Yes. So I know our investigators have been in Spaulding County along with GBI. From what we are seeing in Spaulding County on election day, there was an issue with poll pads not working correctly. That happened in both Spaulding County and Morgan County. And I think what Chairman Knight was getting to with the training is, there is a backup for everything in elections, because it's got to happen on that day. You can't stop voting. The way to the backup that should move through seamlessly is using ballot activation based on the ballot marking devices. Morgan County was able to do that pretty seamlessly. Spaulding County Representative, like the Chairman was saying, was not. We were able to help them get there, but it definitely provided for some consternation, I think, in the morning of election day in Spaulding County. We also saw some videos of people getting things out of dumpsters, and I think making allegations that certain things were thrown away. What we were able to confirm based off of that is that there was nothing that was problematic that had been thrown away. So that was, I think, good to be able to confirm that. We investigated that along with GBI. There are certainly issues in the Spaulding County Elections Office. They are not new. They did not all of a sudden appear this election. And I think some of those are going, and that's what we're investigating. There's going to probably be violations from a paperwork perspective that we're looking at, and that's what we're doing. And I'll get a further update to you, Chairman Knight. And I apologize for not being able to get it to you sooner.
Well, I appreciate it, and I look forward to that. I do agree with some of the statements that are made here, and the overall, as I think politically discuss, is it fraud or illegal? It doesn't matter. It's a vote that should not have counted. And again, because of, history and I guess my background, you made a statement that there's protections of the system, and that's why, there's training, there's the law, there's rules and regs, and there's specific training backup procedures that are put out by the Secretary of State or to be followed. And I think your statement about protections around the system, I mean, that does include training. It includes the procedures that protect the process, if you will. We've heard mention of chain of custody. Those are things that I would like for this committee to start focusing in on as we go forward and maybe consider this. I know I will, as much as the chair will allow me to input into the committee process, but I would tell you that this confidence in the voters is dependent upon the system working, and that the procedures, the safeguards, the chains of custody, and all those issues were followed. Because if they're not, while I can't tell you that, there was, or somebody can't tell you, oh, there was a fraudulent vote, I would tell you from a perspective of a history of, again, a long time ago auditing, if you can't follow the procedures and the safeguards in place, you also can't guarantee me that there was not either a fraudulent vote or an illegal vote. And quite frankly, that's where we are today. And I think it's a major part going forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I would very much agree with that, Chairman Knight. That paperwork is very important, and there's a reason it's in place, and it goes to the overall confidence that you want to provide in the system. So your point is well taken.
What one further question, Mr. Chairman, if I may?
Quickly, please.
I know we've mentioned in just this most recent discussion, talked about signing an oath that, you lived here, or, you are the voter, but I know there's code section about voter certificates. I know that process is electronically done through these poll pads, or there is also the backup or the older way when you got paper ballots, perhaps you got to refer back to them. But is it true? I understand that code section 21.2, 431 and 432 that the law calls for voter certificates. Is it your opinion, and I know I'm putting this on you on the spot, but if those voter certificates were not signed by the electors, what is the effect of that? And what is the effect of that in regards to making sure that every vote counted also? And also the issue of somebody is certifying that they are who they are, but it also includes, if my understanding, an address and perhaps a birth date, if I remember correctly.
Correct. And the voter certificates are very important to these people. That's where they affirm that they are who they say they are and they live where they say they live. So it should be done with every voter. Now it happens electronically when you go vote on election day. At least you sign the poll pad. If you need to early vote, you sign the old paper certificate. But it needs to be it should be done with every voter, and those are some of the issues that we're looking into in Spaulding County.
I thank you, Ryan. I appreciate that, and I hope that you'll look a little bit harder there, because it's information is popping up from constituents that those were not completed, or in some cases those were not completed.
Thank you, Chairman Knight. Representative Bernal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to something that the Secretary mentioned in the beginning, that he wanted to change, that we would no longer have no excuse-based system for absentee voting. And one of the things he mentioned was that because we have 3 weeks of early voting, however, I would like to know what the solution would be, because then we would have all these people standing in line, and we've had enough bad national press of people standing in line. And so this would disenfranchise a lot of voters because they wouldn't want to come out and stand in line. So, and then we also had the case with Cobb County, where they reduced, for the runoff, they reduced their number of early voting locations, which means that, once again, lines, disenfranchisement. So I'd like to know what the solution would be if you don't want to have no excuse-based system for absentee voting. What are we going to do about all the lines and still the perception that Georgia doesn't know how to run an election?
Right, that's a good question. And I think if the General Assembly decides to move back to an excuse-based system, we need to look at making sure counties are offering sufficient in-person voting. We proposed a bill last year that put in place, if there's a line of more than an hour at any point during the day, you've got to either provide additional equipment to the polling place, or split the precinct and provide another polling place. And I think what we've also seen, what we implemented this year, is better line tracking. I think a lot of what we've seen with lines in the past, we did see lines in Fulton County in June primary, certainly, and that was for a lot of reasons. I think mostly related to COVID and to other kind of construction issues that they have, where places were not available. But I think we're instituting better line tracking, so we can see where do those specific issues need to be addressed. Because I think our office has been clear this whole year. Yeah, but you should not have to stand in line a long time to cast a ballot. I think the national sort of trade or national standard is it should be less than 30 minutes, and that's what we think it should be as well.
Thank you. I have one more question. Then, if we were going to order more equipment, would that be on the county or would that be on the state?
So, yes, ma'am. So any additional equipment purchased would be on the county. I think what we see right now from a allocation perspective is there's a sufficient number of machines. In some counties, there might need to be some, maybe some additional polling locations so that the equipment can be spread out a little more. But I think there's sufficient number of machines. We need to look at how it's allocated.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Bernal. Chairman Lumsden, Representative Lumsden, are you on the line still?
Yes.
And then we'll have Representative Gullett and Representative Taylor.
All right. The perceived credibility of the voting of the investigative process is critical to the public confidence in our election outcome. your office conducts investigations of complaints about voting irregularities, voter fraud, and other violations of voter law are serious offenses. You have an investigative division. What is your authority to investigate and their training? How do you pursue prosecutions? And how is your investigative authority different, say, from the GBI?
Yes, sir. Good question. Our investigations division, our chief investigator is Francis Watson. All of our investigators are post-certified law enforcement officers through the Georgia post training. We have, I want to say, 22 investigators currently. We're grateful to the governor for allowing GBI to assist us in the current investigations that we have. What we investigate, we basically do investigations in the elections context for the state election board, and we can investigate election administration, fraud, or irregularities. And then what we provide the results of that investigation to the state election board. State election board makes a determination of how to proceed, and that can be either referring it to the Attorney General's office for administrative, I don't know if prosecution is the right word, but kind of an administrative result where it goes to administrative court. That generally results in a fine, or if for particularly egregious cases, it would we do refer things to district attorney's offices, and then start working with them so they can prosecute. The prosecutorial determination that's made by the individual district attorney in that district, and then we provide the support that he would need from an investigative standpoint, he or she.
All right, very good. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Representative Gullett.
Hey, Ryan, thanks for joining us so long today. I probably, like most people on this committee, have a ton of constituents who just no longer have faith, I think, in the election that happened, and future elections. They've lost a lot of faith. And I believe that we as a state have lost a lot of credibility from our constituents and the voters on the election process. Some of that is related to obviously who wins and who loses, right? That's a big piece of it. Some of it's related to some misinformation. Some of it is related to information that I believe people believe is accurate. December 10th, we had a number of people come testify. I believe they signed affidavits, saying it was, it was truthful. Especially around poll watching, I think a number of those were there outside the campaigns, having trouble, or raising complaints. But people who were poll watchers or worked the polls, poll managers and such, talking about different problems they saw through the process. Today, you guys kind of paint a little different perspective and picture that while the election wasn't, what Secretary Raffensperger, the results that he wanted, that he believes the elections were held properly, and voter fraud, I guess, really didn't change, or nothing about the election changes to the outcome of the election. I'm having trouble reconciling those two. I believe the truth is somewhere in the middle, probably, right? And just like I've served on the Board of Elections in my county before being elected here. Elections are at the county level. I think for my constituents, the biggest hurdle that they have is that Spaulding County is one of the best in the state. And I think anyone who's involved with elections believes that to be true, and sees that to be true. But a county who isn't the best can completely negate Spaulding County's great work in the elections. And that's problematic. And we have to figure out a way. And I look forward to working with you guys to figure out a way for us to make that better. I'm not sure the state is the right answer. Making it a state election is the right answer, but somehow, Spaulding County's big, but it's not big compared to other counties here. And it's really easy to some fraud to negate Spaulding County's outcomes. And that's a problem. But I do have, I guess, two quick questions. Earlier, you said removing dead voters and felons, comes monthly. And when I served on the Board of Elections, that came to us as the board, and we voted to remove those people from the rolls. We had a member of the committee of the board who, at the time, didn't believe felons should lose their right to vote. So we always had one nay on that. I don't know what happens if, a Board of Elections believed that they didn't approve removing these folks from the rolls. I don't know if there's a process that you guys have in place to validate that they have removed these people from the rolls. And I guess that's my first question. Is there a process that the state has in order to validate that the Board of Elections are actually doing this?
Yes, good question. First of all, I would echo your comments about Deirdre Holden and her team in Spaulding County. I think they do a great job. The law for removing dead people and felons is a shall, and it says the election superintendent shall do this. What we provide the counties is the matched list, so they can go through and basically, just hit, kind of approve the ones that we've identified who are dead or convicted of felonies who are on the voter rolls. And we can see that on each county's voter registration dashboard. Are they running the processes that we've sent them? And we do keep up with counties on that. If they were not doing it, that would be a violation of the law. And if they persisted in not, what we have seen is sometimes when people get behind, we call and say, "Hey, you're not running this process," and they say, "Oh yeah, let me get to it." We have not seen anybody who's just, "No, I'm not going to do it." I mean, I think as you understood, kind of, and still do, of course, on the, and that's the position you're in too. That we follow laws that we disagree with all the time. That's, it's when you guys pass a law, that takes the discretion away from us. And federal law, of course, it's the same thing. So we don't see people not doing it, but we do, and we would be watching for that.
My final question, and I appreciate that answer, is I've had a number of people, constituents, actually have submitted open records requests to the office. Secretary of State, they automatically pretty much get a 60-day response back. And I know you guys are inundated with that. I'm not sure if I believe that that's actually following the law, being inundated by giving them a 60-day window. But I'm not a lawyer either. But I don't know how you guys, I think that needs to be fixed from a way that you're definitely inundated, and I sympathize with that wholeheartedly. But I also think we need to improve the process of how do we knock down all those requests. I don't think they're going away, and 2 months is too long in my mind for sunshine on some of these things. So if there's a way for you guys to, figure out a process in place to temporary help or whatever it is to help knock some of these down, that would be, a great, would be much appreciated on my side.
Certainly appreciate the offer of additional resources to
appropriations. I got you. All right. No further questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Representative Gullett. Representative Taylor, Chair Lady Taylor, and then Representative Williamson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Like everybody else, I've had tens of thousands of constituents with issues and concerns about this election this year. A lot of it has to do with things like the ballots. They don't like paper ballots. And there's a big concern about the comparisons of signatures. A lot of these are things that we've talked about. The driver services uses the electronic signature pad, and it's very hard to use that as a comparison. The biggest concern of what I received a lot of complaints is why the Secretary of State sent out requests for absentee ballots. I know myself, I received 4 or 5 in addition to the one from the state. people want to know what that cost and why we did it. I don't see that that is a reason that we need to continue doing things like that. And it amplified the problems with the paper ballots. And is there some way that these ballots can be screened and checked and scanned in prior to the election day? This was another issue that we had with the counting locations. All of this was left until after it was over and some of our larger areas and counties, and that made it take weeks and weeks to be done. Why can't that be done ahead of time? And if you can give me some of those answers, and then I have one other question.
Thank you, Chairwoman. As to your first question about, yes, the Secretary of State's office did decide to send out absentee ballot applications for the primary election only. We did not send out any applications for the general election. The reason we did that was, as you can remember, that was kind of in the crux of COVID, and a lot of counties were having a very difficult time even finding voting locations that would agree to remain voting locations. We also faced lawsuits where people were asking judges to order us to send out not applications, but actual ballots to everybody. And that did happen in a lot of states where people were ordered to send out actual ballots. So, we sent out applications really for two reasons. One, to make sure that in the kind of crux of the COVID crisis, people could vote, and two, to make sure we protected Georgia's double signature verification process. If you send out ballots to everybody, you've gotten rid of an important protection that we have, which is in Georgia, signatures on absentee ballot applications have to be matched before the voter can even get a ballot. And so we wanted to make sure that was done, and that protection was not overridden. In the general, we did not send out any applications to anybody. A lot of third-party groups did, as you mentioned. I think I got the same amount that you talked about for the general election, and that's something that I think is problematic because it goes to what we were talking about with some of these third-party groups, where from what we're seeing so far in our investigations, they're not exercising a lot of responsibility in terms of making sure that people are still eligible to vote. For instance, when we send out applications, you can choose to run, to send them to, if the person has a new address. And we said, no, send them to the address on file. And if it comes back to us, then the county runs the return mail process like they normally do. Third-party groups are, trying to locate those people wherever they may be. And our position was, if you're not where you said you were, then you don't get this application. So I think we were able to do it responsibly, and to make sure that initial signature match protection remained in place. For the general election, we put in place, with the backing of the state election board, an absentee ballot portal that introduced the concept of a photo ID to requesting an absentee ballot. And I think what we've seen is that not only is it not more difficult, in the same way that photo ID at the polls has not really turned out to be a barrier, we've seen that people prefer it. Our online absentee portal requires your first name, last name, date of birth, and driver's license number to match before you're allowed to request a ballot. And I think that's even a better verification than a signature, because I don't even know my driver's license number. I have to look it up every time, or pull out my wallet and look at it every time. So that's what we did. And you asked another question that I forgot, Chairwoman.
Well, it really, I don't want to prolong it because we've talked about this and beat this horse till it can't go anymore. But in closing, I think the security of the counting locations, I get it. This is a problem. We need to have 24/7 security there, better chain of custody. And I guess I'll just close with the perception becomes reality. And with our elections, this has caused a lot of lack of confidence in our election process. It's laid it on your doorstep, whether you want it or not. That's where it is. And we can look at this, and in reality, a lot of this is a local issue. I don't know how much control you have over locals, but I think you need to have more oversight on them. And the public puts it on you. So I would suggest strongly that you see that there is more security and know that the people are watching. The people of Georgia, half of the state is not happy. So I think you realize that, and I would just ask you to please see that the security is there and know that we're here. We want to help and make these better. Thank you.
Chairwoman Taylor, Chairman Black, if I can go into that second question she had, was discussing the early scanning of our ballots. And I believe, Mr. Germany, the SCB passed a rule that allowed for it for 2 weeks for the general, but we've now changed that. If you want to go over that real quick.
Yes, that's right. Reminded me of your question. We did allow a rule for early scanning, but not tabulating of absentee ballots to try to deal with the issue that that you highlighted, Chairwoman. And some counties did better than others. I think what we did see in Georgia is frankly, they counted ballots significantly faster than most other states. We had a very, very close election. So the amount, even the small amount of outstanding ballots was problematic. But, we've tried to get across to counties that, hey, if you are counting them days later, people think that means the ballot came in days later. That's not the case, but it's kind of an understandable jump from from public who's just interested in this. And so we want them to, say you've got to be keeping up with this as much as possible. For the January election, the state election board passed an emergency regulation, slightly changing the early scanning to go from for the last week, you have to do it. So that means we think that every county will be more caught up on election day, and then we'll be thinking of other ways too to make sure that basically, I think the real problem is we want people to know that all the ballots other than military and overseas have to arrive by 7 p.m. on election night. And so the county should be able to put out, a good number of, okay, here's the universe of outstanding ballots for us. And we'll be working with counties to better get that across for the January 5th election.
Thank you, Mr. Germany. Representative Williamson. Your volume.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I appreciate the opportunity to ask a couple of questions. I'm trying to get to my questions. I guess my question is at this late date, and people seem to forget we've got a citizen legislature here, and many of us are at work and carving out time to take up this extremely important subject. My question is going to be directed to the Secretary himself. Is Secretary Raffensperger on the phone?
Yes.
So thank you, Mr. Secretary. I appreciate you joining us today and making this opportunity available for us to ask some hard questions. Just sort of in the same vein as Representative Taylor, we all represent different types of constituencies across this state. And my constituents are particularly upset about the perceived lack of transparency, the fact that they couldn't get anybody on the phone with the Secretary of State's fraud line. And just sort of fast forwarding is I have not heard any testimony today about answering some of the legitimate questions that folks have had about, frankly, what went on in Fulton County. Fulton County, as we all know, we've already discussed it in detail, that this is a county-run system throughout the state. But for over 20 years, in particular, Fulton County has never seemed to get their elections right. as recently as just past June, there was an AJC headline that read, virus, lack of preparation lead to Fulton County election disaster. So 20 years ago, I was searching for it. There was an article in the AJC where Representative John Lewis was saying it was a disaster. Hours in line. 20 years ago, Fulton County was running their elections. Fast forward to this year, they're still running their elections. But it seems to me that there was not a lack of resources on the ground provided, be it training, money, observers, poll watchers, but just a complete mishandling of both the primary elections as well as the general election on November the 3rd. So my question to you, Mr. Secretary, is it true there was only one Secretary of State observer at State Farm Arena that night? And if so, was he also responsible for another location that was over a mile away? Is that true, Mr. Secretary?
Well, thank you for your question, Representative Williamson. First, to your question of transparency, throughout this entire process, we've been very transparent, and also we have sent out several emails and constantly talking to the counties that everyone needs to understand that this election would be highly scrutinized. And this was before we had the questions of a very close election in the state of Georgia, really based on what happened in 2018 when Stacey Abrams ran her campaign and was beat by 53,000 votes by Governor Kemp, and the issues that surrounded that. So we wanted everyone to understand that this was going to be a highly scrutinized election. It was a very important election, and therefore, wherever you could, make sure that if you're going to err on the side of transparency. With your question about not responding to phone calls, the issue that we have is that we have only so many people to answer the phones. And as I'm looking here right now on my phone, I have calls that are coming in from all over the country. And this is an election that does have national importance, obviously, but it's really, I work for the people of Georgia, you work for the people of Georgia, and we are state elected officials, and we have received calls from all over the country. And I would encourage the people in other states to focus on their states, and we'll focus in on Georgia. But that does swamp our boat. And that's the challenge that we have, is really just having the resources, the HR resources, to get back to everyone. Also, though, that I would encourage everyone in your county, Walton County, if people have questions, counties run the elections, to call them. But obviously, we want to be responsive too, but we only have so many resources. That is the first issue. You also talked about Fulton County, and to your point, there was actually, you talked about 20 years, it's actually been 26 years. So for 26 years, Fulton County has been allowed to sit here and fester. And I'm the first Secretary of State that's actually done two things. One is we were allowed, we got a consent decree with Fulton County that put an observer in there based on the election that they ran in the middle of the year at the primary. When you go back to the AJC in 1994, they were talking about Fulton County. So we're the first office that has actually done something with some teeth. And that's why next year that we need the authority, or someone needs this authority, to be able to fire election directors and replace the entire board. I don't need the authority to hire. I need the authority to fire. And then they can go out and hire their own new people. And if they're incompetent, then I'll fire that next bunch. And I'll keep on firing until they get it right. And that's what you would do with anyone in corporate America. In fact, Florida has cleaned up some of their problem counties with that exact same way of doing things, is that they replaced boards, they replaced election officials, and those two counties that they had issues with aren't problems anymore. So we fully hear you because we live it. And I know that every elected official in the state of Georgia is hearing from their people also. So
my question
the other question, but to that point, the only reason the SOS was allowed to have a muncher in Fulton County was because the SEB, the State Election Board, and the Fulton consent decree due to the June 9th meltdown failure. If it wasn't for that, we wouldn't even be able to have that. So we had the resources, and going forward, we'd like to have additional resources. But to your point, you know, we obviously, you know, share your concerns, and that's why the SEB acted on that.
So Mr. Secretary, to clarify then, because this is news to me, you're saying it would have been illegal for the Secretary of State to have an observer on premises absent this judicial consent decree?
No, I didn't say that at all. What I said is we had an observer that really had, he really had additional authority and oversight that you normally wouldn't have. We have investigators there, and we have had those for years with several secretaries of state, and we had investigators going back to the June, and we have investigators. We have 22 investigators to cover the entire state.
Well, then in the same vein, because the number one question I get is, what's going to be different if there was chain of custody issues, if there was security tag issues, if there was observer issues from distancing and training and resources? What's changing for this upcoming election that we could have more assurance that that the procedures and processes that I think Representative Knight kind of described real well from his CPA background, what assurances do we have that we have these systems in place that will run more efficiently for this election?
Well, let Gabriel and Ryan answer that, because they're been working on those specific concerns that you just raised.
Mr. Secretary, respectfully, I'd love to hear your point as the elected official in charge of all this.
Mr. Secretary? Can you address that?
One of the issues that we have right now is we have an awful lot of ongoing litigation and investigations, and I believe it'd be best if our corporate counsel would answer those questions.
Hi, Germany. I'm happy to address that. So, yes, the point the Secretary was making that we took specific action after the June primary to put in place additional oversight into Fulton County. We asked the General Assembly in the session for authority to, similar to what you guys have done for school boards when they're consistently failing to have the state election board step in and replace that board. That did not pass. So failing that, we did the resources and the procedures that we could use through the state election board to put in place additional oversight into Fulton County prior to the November election. And I think what you'll see through that is the amount of issues that Fulton County had from the primary to the November election was significantly decreased. And I think it made for a much overall much better election than we would have had we not taken those additional steps.
I think Brad was getting legal advice before answering that question.
As well, to step into Fulton. The problems that you mentioned, Representative, especially in Fulton, have been long-standing, and it's a consistent issue. I think we did, using the resources available to us, everything possible this year to get as much monitoring in place prior to this year, prior to November, and that monitor is still in place for January. And so we have basically on the ground, basically people in the room there every day to monitor what they're doing.
And one more thing, since multiple locations, what happened starting election night forward, we always had an investigator or the SEV monitor at both the English Street warehouse and at State Farm where they're doing the ballot processing. And knowing what's happened since then, our intent is to have an investigator there essentially, or the SEV monitor at one of the two places at all times to keep track of that and make sure that it's all done properly. Now, everything we've seen on video shows that it was, but I understand that people's thoughts on that, and so does the secretary. So he's instructed us to go down that path to make sure there's somebody who's directly accountable to our office or to the SEB in the room with them during all these processes.
Well, respectfully, Mr. Sterling, either or locations, it doesn't make sense to me. I don't understand why you don't have two people at both locations.
Well, that's what I'm saying. There will be two people, be either an investigator or the SEB monitor will always be at one of the two locations. We're coordinating those activities.
Well, that's fine with me if you have 4 at each location. But
to your point, you point out that Representative Knight, Chairman Knight, had issues in Spaulding, and our issue is we have 22 investigators, and there's issues that pop up every day. So on election day, we always disperse them around the state. So I think we all agree Fulton needs some focus, but we have to be aware that there's going to be issues that pop up because human beings run elections in other parts, in Chatham, in Thomas, in Brooks. You never know where it's going to be. So we have to use the resources we have in such a way as to instill voter confidence, but execute good election administration at the same time. I hope that helps to quell some of the fears moving forward, because it was decided on that election night that from that point forward, given the questions around that, we were just going to have a body in that room at all times, and we did.
Mr. Chairman, I got one more follow-up question. If you don't mind.
Yes, sir.
And I'll wrap it up. On that is a little lead-in monologue on the whole issues that I thought great job of Representative Jones bringing it up, talking about the machines and whether or not we can literally audit those. I thought, again, Representative Knight with his CPA background touched on the whole audit process. We've talked about Cobb County. We've talked about, I understand the University of Georgia has been hired to do the, and I don't know what we're calling this statewide absentee ballot signature check, but I know that from my business experience, when you're talking about auditing, when you're looking at financial statements, you're looking at either review, compile, or true audits. And I'm begging the Secretary of State and this General Assembly to look at true forensic audits, to take the ambiguity and doubt about this balloting system. Representative Shannon made a great point about the fact that her colleagues were very suspect about the system that was ultimately chosen by the Secretary of State's office. Now, I want to remind everyone, especially any constituents and citizens that might be watching this, that the General Assembly's intent in House Bill 316 was a system, a methodology, and there was no vendor picked. The vendor was vetted by the appropriate authorities in the purchasing arm of the state of Georgia. And then I understand that several approved vendors were qualified through the bid selection process. And then the ultimate choice came down to the Secretary of State's office themselves. So that being said, I would like to know if the Secretary of State, given the discussion around and the concerns about the Dominion scanning and tabulate software, Mr. Secretary, would you commit to conduct an official manual recount of all 3 races prior to the state certification of the January the 5th runoff? Mr. Secretary, that's a specific question for you.
Well, to go back to your first question, though, I would like to make the point that, as I think Gabriel Sterling made it, absentee ballots by their very nature are subjective. So that's the challenge with the signature match. And that's why when we migrated and we came out with that absentee ballot portal, which connected you to Department of Driver Services, was a much better, secure way of going. With the machines themselves, I want to also reemphasize the point made earlier that some people glossed over or maybe wasn't heard. And that is that we have done a forensic of a sample size of the machines. And if money were no object, we could do that for every single machine in the state of Georgia. But of the audit that was done, the forensic audit, it showed that the machines, were counting correctly. when we did the hand retally, some people call it a hand recount, but it's a hand retally during the audit process, that served the additional purpose of showing that the machines obviously did not flip votes that had been recording in other states, because we got, in many of the counties, over 50 of the counties had the exact same number. And so that is something that would verify that. As it relates to this upcoming election, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but a candidate that does not prevail and is within 0.5% is then entitled to a recount. And a recount would be the machines running through that scanner. And so that would be something. The actual audit process was something that was in 316 for the general election. And so that is something we'll consider what you've requested today. But we also understand that really it's that 0.5% difference in the vote. So if there was a 2% difference, 4%, 5%, or something like that, then those would be the results. And I don't believe anyone would question the results. But I do appreciate the national significance of this. But what we've shown is that the machines are accurately tabulating. And that's very important for everyone to consider. And perhaps we've put that to bed by doing the 100% hand count or the retally during that audit process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The ballot marking device, we've got two pieces of equipment. It's my observation, it seems like all the concern is not with the ballot marking device. That actually still seems to be a very efficient way to load a ballot and then get voter intent on a ballot, since we all get to hold that ballot and see very clearly, to Representative Shannon's point, the direct voter intent of that ballot. It seems to me that any mischief that may or may not be going on, and again, a true forensic audit, a robust forensic audit will validate it one way or the other, is in the scanning software, the tabulating software, of which I don't have an IT background. I defer to Representative Jones. I understand he had to get on off the call today. I would defer to my colleagues in the General Assembly that are much more up to speed on that issue. But again, thank you for joining us, Mr. Secretary. I wish you could have joined us at our December the 10th meeting, but 2 weeks late is better than never at all. So I applaud you for making this.
But to Representative Williams' point again, when we did the forensic audit of the machine, it was of the scanner. It is of the entire system, but those scanners that are doing the tabulation and the scanning, those are what were audited also. So they're I don't want to leave any doubt in anyone's mind. And so we know that the machines were actually accurately scanning, accurately tabulating, and that was part of the forensic audit that Pro V1 did. And I believe that everyone's had a copy of that.
What they're dancing around is the fact that they did not, when they duplicated ballots, there's lots of whistleblowers and affidavit witnesses that would see and have seen a ballot be messed up, and they would duplicate it, but onto 3 or 4 or 5 other ballots. So if you count the paper ballots and you compare it to the machine, the numbers are going to be the same, because the paper ballots themselves is what was messed up, and that's what they're not talking about.
It just draws it out longer, but thank you. Yeah, please go ahead.
Representative Williamson, you said it was the decision of the Secretary of State's office to pick Dominion at the end. Not exactly how the procurement process works. We had a scoring system that was set up, and a team of people that was majority not SOS staff, but experts and county election division managers and disability experts and IT security experts were the ones who did the scoring. And then when we put together the RFP, we actually lowered the price percentage on there so there wouldn't be a price-driven decision. And when that happened, the scoring came out to Dominion and then ES&S, who was the incumbent vendor. Then our office went into negotiations with both of them because they were relatively close, but not really, really close. And they both sharpened their pencil and came back and lowered the price for taxpayers again, and Dominion remained on top after that. So there was no choice. We follow the law and the rules of the state procurement system. So it's not like it was chosen over something else based on an internal belief. It was based on a scoring system that is put together by the Georgia procurement law. And then to the Secretary's point, by doing the hand tally, it showed that the counting was done properly by the machines. And something people may not understand in the process of this,
before every single machine is put out to be used in the election, whether it be for early voting, the counting of absentee ballots, or election day voting, it goes through a logic and accuracy test. And in that logic and accuracy test, each and every machine, that hash value is checked against what we call the golden record to make sure it is running the correct software and there hasn't been any hacks. And everybody needs to understand that the scanners, the BMDs, and the election management systems are all air-gapped. They are not touched by the internet. I know we have to keep on saying these things because we have to break through some of this stuff sometime, but the forensic audit that we did on the randomized sampling around the state, again, showed that every machine had the right hash value, there was no hacking, and then the hand tally showed that they counted those ballots as they were marked properly. So I just want to make that very clear, and it wasn't like a choice, it was a following the law that got to this procurement.
Representative Williams, Mary Frances Williams, you have a quick question you asked?
I'll try to be quick as my predecessors. So I'm from Cobb. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think my main concern is voters in my district being able to vote and knowing that their votes are counted. And that's what I'm hearing from constituents. I'm getting the thousands of emails that I know all of us are getting, but I would say about 30 are from people who actually are, who live in my district, and not many more from that are even from Georgia. Voters in my district are concerned with how long it takes to vote and their vote being counted, as I said. I understand Cobb was chosen for an audit, and I know I'm making a statement. I'll get to a question. Cobb was chosen for an audit of our absentee ballot signature audit, and I want to say I'm very proud of our Cobb Elections Board and our Cobb Director, and I can't imagine that the ability of Cobb folks being able to choose our own elections director and our own elections board being able to be a part of that. One of my main concerns, there's so much talk during this conversation about getting rid of no excuse absentee voting and starting to require driver's licenses. And I've done a lot of work with aging folks and also the disability community. And my question is, how are you going to be able to make it possible for people who don't need a driver's license and don't have one to be able to vote if you make it dependent on driver's license? And this question has come up before. I think we need to take a hard look at it. And I just would like to know how you intend to handle that so you don't disenfranchise older and disabled voters.
I would normally want Ryan to answer that question, but it looks like he's muted and stepped away from his computer. Oh, there he is. Is he back? Ryan?
Back.
Okay,
sorry. I did catch the last end of the question. Yes, I think you raise a very important point. That's something that we deal with in basically all of the election laws and processes. The fact is, the vast majority of people do have a driver's license or state ID, and we can use that to make things easier and to make work better. You do have to have a process for people that don't. It's the same way that our photo ID law works, where there's other IDs that work, and then you can also get a free voter ID from your county elections office if you don't have any of those things. So I think it would be something similar that's in place. Federal law recognizes the same thing, that requires matching of driver's license numbers, and then if it doesn't match, then other things come into play. So I think that's the way that we would do that.
Yeah, it's just kind of hard to get to Cobb Elections from a nursing home. I I think that would be a pretty big hurdle for a lot of people.
Thank you. I know we've got a couple of follow-up questions. I'm going to try to, I've got a number of questions that have been fed to me from other members, from constituents, and I too, like Representative Williams just stated, have gotten thousands and thousands of emails. Some constituents, many not, and also a lot of phone calls, hundreds of phone calls, et cetera. So I'll try to go through this as quickly as I can. We are an hour long, but want to try to see if you can get some of these answered. So if you could just send us, Mr. Sterling or Mr. Germany, Secretary, what's different. A lot of folks are wondering, how is my vote going to count? Is it secure? I don't have confidence in this next election. For January 5th, if you get us something that what might be in place different that could make people feel a little more confident and secure about their vote being and counted legitimately and legally and correctly, and that election is going to be held in such manner. Let's see. I get a lot of questions about people saying they go to vote and they are being told they already voted, and various things happen from that point forward. But there have been repeated reports of those coming to our office and other folks. Can you speak to that at all?
Yes, sir. Yes, that's a good point. And we have received those reports as well from the general election and a handful from early voting here. What we found in the general election is we probably got 100 or 150 complaints of that happening, and it was people being told when they went to vote, oh, they had requested an absentee ballot. And the way that it works, if you've requested an absentee ballot and then you show up to vote in person, there's some steps you have to take to cancel that absentee ballot, which include making sure that you're absentee, that you haven't already voted, and then if you don't surrender your absentee ballot, then that it's not, you can't later turn it in and vote twice. So we see kind of a couple different things happening there. One, people being told they've requested an absentee ballot and they say, oh, I haven't. What we saw for most of the time for that was people were on what's called the rollover list, which if you ask, if you're over 65, disabled, or military overseas, you can make one request and receive an absentee ballot for the entire cycle if you check the box requesting that. So what we saw is some people did request that, and then maybe were kind of unaware that they had requested that. The other thing we see is what you said, is when people show up to vote and they're told, oh, you already voted absentee. So what that is, what we have found in our ongoing investigations is, one, seems like the poll worker really should say you requested an absentee ballot, not that they've already voted absentee, even though that is what the poll worker said, because we did see they'd already voted. And then we did have a handful of issues where basically someone's status was entered incorrectly. Like we said earlier, elections are run by people in 159 different counties, and every once in a while there are things not put in correctly. From what we've seen, that happens very, very infrequently, and we investigate those as we get them, but that's what we're seeing as we investigate it.
So have you seen anybody actually vote for somebody else?
No.
So there were a number of counties, or how many counties, I guess is the question, were not caught up with their absentee ballot processing by the morning of the general election on the 3rd. Do you have a number of those counties?
I'm not sure what you mean.
Well, it seemed to take counties several days, and I just wondered how many of them were actually caught up with all the absentee ballot processing that they were allowed to do by election morning.
Well,
I can step,
yeah, go ahead, Dave.
from my recollection, nearly every county was caught up on the morning of the working through Monday evening.
You know which ones were not?
I was about to get to that. I guarantee you Fulton was one of them because they were just a little behind, but they had the biggest backlog of any of those. I am honestly not aware of anybody else that was behind by more than maybe that Monday afternoon mail going into Tuesday, because Tuesday they were focused on the election. I simply am not aware of anybody who was that far behind on those fronts, because when we were talking to them all, we got indications from most of them. I can get with our elections director, who's actually off today, get a specific number on that one, but there was nobody who was like woefully behind. Everybody's like, we're caught up to where we need to be. Fulton was the only one that I'm aware of that seemed to have some backlog going in, which was part of the reason we were so irritated when it looked like they were going to knock off that night.
With the state election board rule that you put in place of requiring the week before to begin, do you anticipate that helping those counties that weren't able to get it done?
Well, one would hope so. That's the intent.
Okay. So regarding registration, I know that you have a state race and you have federal races, and are you going to be able to differentiate those registrations and who's eligible to vote in the election based on separate rules there?
Georgia state law says that to be eligible to vote in a runoff, you've got to be eligible to vote in the initial election. We were sued about that a few years ago from a federal election standpoint. Federal law says that you cannot have a registration deadline more than 30 days before an election. And the question was, is a runoff an election? We had always considered it just a continuation of the election, not a new election. But federal law defines a runoff as a new election for federal elections. So that put us in the position of having to, we argued in court that was not a correct interpretation. We were not successful in that argument. We had to put in place a new election deadline, new voter registration deadline for federal elections. What we found when we put that in place is when elections are on the same day, we're not able systematically to have two different voter registration deadlines. It doesn't work. We tried to do it in 2018, and basically we had a lot of problems in terms of not identifying people correctly. And so it doesn't work. And so that put us in a position of having to choose between which law we follow, the federal or the state law. And talking with the Attorney General's office, the U.S. Constitution says that federal law always prevails over a conflicting state law, so or even a conflicting state constitution. So we had to basically make that voter registration deadline the same in order to comply with federal law. I would say that's another instance of the Secretary referred to where federal law kind of comes in and does something that messes us up basically.
Thank you. Jumping quickly to and I know there are just dozens and dozens of questions that I'm not going to be able to get to here, but just quickly, I can try to ask these quickly if y'all could answer them quickly. The consent decree that's spoken about broadly back from March 6th. What was Gwinnett? I mean, they were sued. I understand. What was their process before?
Their process prior to that agreement was similar to what's in the settlement agreement. We spoke with them about what they did before we agreed to anything.
What were they sued over?
They were sued over signature matching.
I guess is my question. What was it before and what was it after?
So what I'm trying to say is the settlement agreement did not from my understanding, reflecting any change in their process. In terms of why did the Democrats would sue them, you're going to have to ask them.
Who were parties in the agreement?
The plaintiffs were the Democratic Party of Georgia, the Democratic, DSCC, and I think the DCCC.
Now, the absentee by mail, the applications that went out, I know we touched on that a little bit earlier. Was there a particular law or legal precedent that Secretary of State that you used to do that application mailing?
No.
No?
No.
I know there were some other follow-ups. I think I have, generally speaking, tried to touch on some of these as best I can. Let me real quick, Mr. Turner, Representative Turner, I know you wanted to readdress if you could.
If you were asking whether or not us sending out absentee ballot applications is authorized by law, I believe that it is. I believe it is something we can do. So, in terms of does the law specifically speak to it, I think the answer is no.
Well, I believe it was a noble goal, but we're not a nation of goals, we're a nation of laws, and I just wanted to know where that stood regarding our laws and the state of Georgia. So I think I get your answer, unless you have anything to follow up on with that. Representative Turner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Earlier, we were talking about BMDs and then voter intent. Over the summer, when we had our first set of hearings after the primary, I had brought up this issue about the ballot marking devices prompting voters who leave certain races blank. It gives the impression that the voter does in fact have to make a choice in an election. I've gotten reports from several of my own constituents who have pointed out, I thought I had to vote for this particular judge's race, even though I didn't want to, or it wouldn't print my ballot. And I think that's a problem in the software that continues to kind of skew voter intent, and I think it needs to be addressed. And that's not really a question, that's more of a statement. Because when we talk about the fact that there were 1.3 million hand-marked paper ballots, people aren't complaining about those. It's very clear they marked their ballots, and there hasn't been any widespread reports of issues with them. So at the very least, I believe the software needs to be adjusted to deal with that issue. But I do have a question again about the national change of address. Is it the opinion of the Secretary of State's office when you send a card after an NCOA hit on a voter, that's probable cause that the voter may have moved? Does that rise to the level of probable cause?
Probable cause for I think you're kind of conflating two separate processes. One is the list maintenance process that we do. And the NCOA match leads to the sending of the confirmation card. And then what happens with that confirmation card, whether it's returned or not, and what the voter says to us, that then generates the next process, which is if they confirm they're out of state, they're removed. If they give us updated contact information, it's updated. If they don't respond, they're moved to inactive. The probable cause determination comes in when in these voter challenges that are happening. There's two people that the law basically gives authority to challenge voters, and it's either the county elections board or an elector in that county. It's not about whether or not it's not about removing them from the list for not living here anymore. That's the process we do. The voter challenge goes to, does this person hold the qualifications to cast a legal vote? And to challenge someone, you've got to show with your submission to the county elections board, and it's a determination made by the county elections board that probable cause exists that they do not hold those qualifications. So, you know, that's up to the county elections board, and that's up to basically what the challenger submits.
Is there anything in law that requires a county elections board to check if an elector is being challenged based on a national change of address form being submitted?
To check what?
To check, there have been several challenges around the state where people are using NCOA as, I guess Mr. Sterling could potentially, when he challenged the lady in Maryland who's using his address, is that sufficient to rise to the level of probable cause, in your opinion?
So, you know, that's a determination that's left to each county elections board.
And so is there anything in law that requires them to look at that as and consider it as probable cause?
I don't believe there is. I think the determination of probable cause is left to the county elections board. Now, I would say, you know, if a determination is made that someone disagrees with, they can file, you know, what's called a writ of mandamus and challenge that determination. For instance, Mr. Sterling's challenge was based off of, I live in this house. This person does not live in this house. You know, I know they don't live here. So that's different than, I think, you know, a list of NCOA. So it's, I mean, where each county board is going to set that, it's kind of like judges. You know, different judges reach different determinations, even based on the same amount of evidence.
Thank you for that. We heard
Rep. Turner, can I skip to Representative Gullett real quick? I know we're kind of, I think we're running out of time with the Secretary of State's office. They've been generous with their time. I want to thank them for that. But Representative Gullett, you had a quick follow-up question. I think Chairman Powell had a quick one as well.
Yeah, I did. This is for the Secretary Raffensperger. If the election was only in Fulton County, would you have certified this election?
That goes to conjecture. We deal with what we have, and we have 159 counties.
Now,
that's called deflection.
What we certify, what we are doing when we certify is we are totaling the certified results from each county. You know, Fulton County did certify their results. I think 2 of their board members dissented from that, but you know, their board is a board as a whole, kind of like what you were talking about, and when y'all removed felons in Spaulding County. So they certified their results. We, of course, you know, we had a state election board monitor there, you know, what we are looking for is, you know, is there something that, you know, we are seeing that basically puts in question these results that are being certified by the county, and it's not saying that everything happened perfectly. Like Representative Knight made the point, you know, there's paperwork that's required, it's important, but if it's not done 100%, that doesn't mean we don't certify an election. It's never meant that before, and it doesn't all of a sudden mean that now.
Chairman Powell. Oh, what was that, Representative Gullett?
I was just saying thank you.
Chairman Powell, can you be quick?
I can, maybe.
That's what she said.
I want to thank the Secretary and his staff for being there this morning. But there's a couple of things that prompted my thoughts. You know, having looked at all of this, the stuff, and I know we do in fact have 2 Georgias. We got rural Georgia and metro Georgia, and the growth factor is just exponential. And with the COVID virus and the way it's changed everything, it certainly gave these elections a whole different face this year. But that being said, to the Secretary, prompting some of the comments you made that echoes some of my feelings about local boards of election. You go to various and sundry boards of elections, and some of them function different than others. Do we think that it would be proper that we have a specific, and I mean a very specific protocol to be put in place about how these boards of elections function? I know there's always certain things that are always going to be extraordinary. We had a situation of a voter that went into the polls in Hart County and he voted and he was told he had already voted. And this was last week. Then to find out that the clerk that had checked him in was hitting the button twice. One was saying that he voted, and of course they replaced her promptly. But because of that, would it not be in order that we put specific ironclad protocols in there about how these boards of elections, how they will function, and so it does away with this perception of any type of wrongdoing, that human factor, to see if we can somehow move forward and put these laws in just very specific fashion.
Chairman Powell, you raise up a very good point. To be on a county election board is an incredible responsibility, and it's not to be part of a social club or a point on your resume. And what I've seen is many of the counties really take their responsibility. The election board members take their responsibility very seriously, and that's a good thing. What I have found, though, is sometimes it seems that it's more of a point of I'm on this election board. There's a lot of hard work in election. Our election officials work very, very hard. We have, in fact, it was mentioned earlier about Spaulding County, Deidre Holden, and many of you are very proud of your election directors for your counties, and rightly so. My point of this is that on election night, we have people that are involved in these. In fact, one of our state election board members, Matt Mashburn, was put on this board this year. He was the Senate nominee. Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan put him on. And this man, he's an attorney. He's been visiting the precincts and election offices and monitoring elections, going all the way back to Ann Lewis and Mr. Strickland's days, and has been following this very closely. And he was actually in English Avenue location on election night. And so that speaks to the involvement of one of our state election board members. And that, I think, is to be highly commended. And so to your point, I believe that it's a high responsibility. We want to make sure that we have fair and honest elections. And so that is something, obviously, the will of the General Assembly. But I think your point is very well taken. Thank you for raising it.
Yeah, specifically, and that would mean that we need to have more oversight over the local elections board so that they understand that specifically this is how they operate. So we don't have complaints like we heard at our last committee meeting week before last. A lot of things gave me great concern that prompted me to call for that statewide audit. Last subsequent question, and I'll get on, but on this statewide audit that I understand that you have now decided to do, how are y'all coming along? I understand you've taken up Cobb County, but when will y'all be moving into the other counties?
As it relates to Cobb County, I was there yesterday morning before we began the process. We had 18 teams of 3, 2 GBI agents and 1 Secretary of State investigator looking at that. Once the computers, were basically uploaded, the information was active. I left because it is an active investigation, and so they're doing their work with GBI and our office. There was the comment that they were hopefully working on so many per hour, multiply that by 18 teams, and so you can work through the numbers. We're hopeful that we'll accomplish that before Christmas, but we'll have to see how that goes. It's a very timely process. In fact, I believe one of the guest speakers that you had at your earlier hearing, J. Christian Adams, said to do a full statewide audit would take several months, I believe was what his testimony said. So it is a long process, but our hope is to enroll into the other counties as soon as we can, and we'll get that time frame to you. We don't have that set yet, but we're working on that, and as soon as we have a date for you, we'll let you know.
Could you tell me what the percentage of the variable percentage that y'all will be working from to see if there is if there was any fraud or a percentage of it? Have y'all made that decision yet on the percentage of the absentees that y'all were sampling?
We haven't made that decision yet. In state law, to be somewhat consistent, we have a 90% confidence level for the audit of the ballot marking devices. So we might set that percentage, might set it higher. We just have to look at what that looks like. But we'll be leaning into the team that'll be leading that, and then following their recommendations.
Be sure, I hope we're on the same wavelength, but we're talking about the exact match on the absentees. Is that correct?
Right. We're talking about the absentee ballot
exactly.
Audit
yes, sir.
Study. Yes. Yes.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman Powell, I'm gonna move on here. We have been excessively long, and I just want to thank. I know y'all may have to drop off. I want to thank the Secretary Raffensperger, very much for indulging us with a generous amount of time this morning. Same with Mr. Germany, Mr. Sterling. Thank you. Merry Christmas to you. If you need to jump off, I'm just going to take a final minute or two with the committee here and just say that 2020 has presented itself a workload, an immense workload for our committee, and y'all have answered the call, and up to including here the day before Christmas Eve. So I just want to extend a special thank you from myself to each and every one of you for your engagement and your participation and what you've done. And I especially want to give a special thank you to two members that should we not have another meeting, in the next couple of weeks, or be able to circle up in the next couple of weeks. Representative Scott Turner could very well be, his last occasion with us, and Minority Leader Trammell. I don't see you, Leader Trammell, but I think you're on the call. So I especially want to.
You ever seen someone take their glasses off and you get blurry?
Get the chance to participate with the committee. And if y'all have a comment, I would certainly yield.
No, I just Merry Christmas. It's been a labor of love in this committee. Elections are not partisan, and the work that we've done, I think, to try to bring a secure, verifiable process is one that it started out with the greatest of intentions, and I think needs to continue to be examined so that we can get it right. I don't think it's nearly as bad as what people have tried to paint it to be. And I have great faith in your work, Mr. Chairman, members of this committee, moving forward to continue to address the issues, to continue to build confidence in the results of our elections. And it's been a huge honor to be part of it. Thank you, and Merry Christmas.
Leader Trammell,
Mr. Chairman, I just want to say it's been an honor and privilege to serve on the committee, and I wish everyone and their family a Merry Christmas.
Thank you both. Again, if there's nothing for the good of the order, I would thank everybody again, wish you and your families a very Merry Christmas, and I look forward to speaking with you again here soon. With that, we stand adjourned.
All right, everyone. Off-road, does the hooligan status transfer to Discord and DLive? Not at this time. There's too many people for me to go through and verify you each individually to stick a little badge near your name, because in the Discord I would have to do it by hand. I don't know a whole lot about DLive. I just get it on the screen. Big shout out to everyone that's watching on DLive right now. I am working on that. I'm doing this all by myself, so I'm overwhelmed with work, but I am trying. So yeah, another hearing or meeting or whatever I gotta say so YouTube doesn't delete me. They're just running out the shot clock. They're not trying to find anything. You can tell by the questions they ask, the way they answer questions. Some of these people sound like the sloth on Zootopia. They're just really talking really slow without saying anything. And I don't want to say it's a waste of time, because it's not. It's important that we see what's happening. Even if progress isn't being made on their end, we all can see it happen. Because I guarantee if you read this on CNN or the New York Times or whoever, go look it up. You know, it's going to be up in about 5 minutes. They're all going to tell you something different than what we just watched. It doesn't matter what you watch on here. If you see it live and you wait about 5 minutes after it ends, you will see that anybody who's reporting the news is going to tell you something other than what we've seen. Now, it may not be intentional, but you are hearing their interpretation of what happened. That's why watching this live is so important, because I'm not telling you what happened. I'm not telling you what to feel, what to think, and what to believe. I put it on the screen, and I make sure that I do the best I can to get all of us together to be able to view it. So, yeah. Although, you know, progress isn't being made, it's still important that we see it. I believe that, you know, somebody will stand up for us, and when it comes down to the end, I believe the president will stand up for us, and that's not a biased opinion or anything like that. The president's been pretty quiet lately, and I think it's just like, you know, I've been kind of mentioning, everybody wants to storm the streets, everybody wants to go and, you know, take matters into their own hands, and I understand how you feel, but if we don't let the system do what they're supposed to do, whether they're going to do it or not, we still need to give them the time to do it before people start acting like that. You know, just like if someone crosses you in person, you know, like in a personal situation, somebody does something to you, yeah, you could lash out and take matters into your own hands, but what happens? Your freedom gets taken away. You become incarcerated, and then they have the opportunity to make you look bad and basically judge your character without you even having the ability to speak up for yourself, because you're incarcerated and you've been made to look like the bad guy. That could very well happen in this situation. If people don't allow the system and due process to happen, and they just go and take matters in their own hands, think about what people will say about you. You know, maybe not your friends and your family, but think about what the news says. Think about what you see people say about me. That's just a part of it. So I think that, and this is just my opinion, but I think that everyone needs to kind of sit back and see what's going to happen, because we all feel the same. Oh, we all feel the same. I'm connected to a lot of people, and I think we're all on the same page here. But we need to let them fail us before we declare that they have. You know what I mean? So we have to let that time pass before we say, oh, they let us down. We have to get all the way there first. And like I said, that's just my opinion. That's what I think. I think that, you know, us watching this every day and watching it happen over and over, and people lie and not, you know, really examine the truth or the evidence or any of that kind of stuff. I know it's frustrating, but you got to take a breath. You got to step back, go do something that's fun. That's why I kind of crack jokes and stuff through these, you know, these gatherings, because it is very serious, but it isn't nothing new. We've been seeing this, you know, every week for over a month now. People gathering, lying, yelling over witnesses, yelling over people who are speaking their testimonies. This isn't new. You know, we need to have a little bit of fun and enjoy the freedom we have before stuff gets real serious. Hopefully it doesn't get that serious, but if nobody stands up for us, there's more of us than them. And you see what happened last time. We had DC on the screen. Things get serious really quick. So, you know, definitely, especially because it's Christmas week, go out, have some fun, have some laughs, drink some beer, you know, enjoy the time with people you have, enjoy the rights that you have right now, whatever's still left. And I'm speaking to you from Michigan. We're basically the first ones to hit communism. You can't do anything here, but just do your best to have fun, and the truth will come out one way or another, and we're all on the same page. I'm not downplaying how you guys feel. I feel the same way. We're all in the same boat. We're all in this together. We're all Americans, and for those of you that aren't Americans, you're here and you're showing support for what we're all going through, and I'm sure you're seeing similar things happening in your country. I'm seeing this happen all over the world. Yeah, we're all in this together. So, big shout out to Shane. I'm going to put his website up again for, I don't want to mess his business name up, but he created the new badges that you guys see next to the membership names. I'm also going to put out shirts that also have that new logo on it. Oh, just a moment. His business is Boss Digital Media LLC. It's bossdigitalmedia.com. I'm going to put that in the chat. Big shout out to him. He didn't charge me for the logos. He did a great job. We worked on it, had a little bit of a back and forth and got it, really figured out. Big shout out to him and his contribution to what we're doing here. He basically sponsored the video today. So big shout out to him. Definitely go check out his website. Big shout out to everyone that made donations, joined the membership program, and purchased any merch. I really appreciate all of you. I definitely would not be able to do it without you. Thank you, the Tano and Debbie, for joining the membership program, and welcome to the family. You're both officially hooligans. So yes, big shout out to all of you. You are what's keeping the channel going. So thank you so much. I'm sure I've rambled on enough. You guys got the idea. We will go live the next time there's something going on, whether it's later today or tomorrow. Either way, until then, stand tall, shine bright. That's a wrap.